This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recorded by Alan Davis Drake at paintedricecakes.org. Ulysses by James Joyce. Chapter 17. What parallel courses did Bloom and Stephen follow, returning? Starting united both at normal walking pace from Beresford Place, they followed in the order named Lower and Middle Gardner Streets and Mountjoy Square West, then at reduced pace, each bearing left Gardner's Place by an inadvertence as far as the farther corner of Temple Street, then at reduced pace with interruptions of halt, bearing right, Temple Street North as far as Hardwicke Place. Approaching disparate at relaxed walking pace, they crossed both the Circus before George's Church diametrically, the chord in any circle being less than the arc which it subtends. Of what did the duumvirate deliberate during their itinerary? Music, literature, Ireland, Dublin, Paris, friendship, women, prostitution, diet, the influence of gaslight or the light of arc and glow lamps on the growth of adjoining paraheliotropic trees, exposed corporation emergency dust buckets, the Roman Catholic Church, ecclesiastical celibacy, the Irish nation, Jesuit education, careers, the study of medicine, the past day, the maleficent influence of the pre-Sabbath, Stephen's collapse. Did Bloom discover common factors of similarity between their respective like and unlike reactions to experience? Both were sensitive to artistic impressions, musical in preference to plastic or pictorial. Both preferred a continental to an insular manner of life, a cisatlantic to a transatlantic place of residence. Both indurated by early domestic training and an inherited tendency of heterodox resistance, professed their disbelief in many orthodox religious, national, social, and ethical doctrines. Both admitted the alternately stimulating and obtunding influence of heterosexual magnetism. Were their views on some points divergent? Stephen dissented openly from Bloom's views on the importance of dietary and civic self-help, while Bloom dissented tacitly from Stephen's views on the eternal affirmation of the spirit of man in literature. Bloom assented covertly to Stephen's rectification of the anachronism involved in assigning the date of the conversion of the Irish nation to Christianity from Druidism by Patrick, son of Calpurnius, son of Potitus, son of Odysseus, sent by Pope Celestine I in the year 432, in the reign of Leary, to the year 260 or thereabouts in the reign of Cormac MacArt, died 266 A.D., suffocated by imperfect deglutition of ailment at Sletty and interred at Rossnaree. The collapse which Bloom ascribed to gastric inanition and certain chemical compounds of varying degrees of adulteration and alcoholic strength, accelerated by mental exertion and the velocity of rapid circular motion in a relaxing atmosphere, Stephen attributed to the reapparition of a matutinal cloud, perceived by both from two different points of observation, Sandy Cove and Dublin, at first no bigger than a woman's hand. Was there one point on which their views were equal and negative? The influence of gaslight or electric light on the growth of adjoining paraheliotropic trees. Had Bloom discussed similar subjects during nocturnal perambulations in the past? In 1884 with Owen Goldberg and Cecil Turnbull at night on public thoroughfares between Longwood Avenue and Leonard's Corner and Leonard's Corner and Sing Street and Bloomfield Avenue. In 1885 with Percy Apjohn in the evenings, reclining against the wall between Gibraltar Villa and Bloomfield House in Crumlin, barony of Uppercross. In 1886, occasionally with casual acquaintances and prospective purchasers on doorsteps, in front parlours, in third-class railway cars of suburban lines. In 1888, frequently with Major Brian Tweedy and his daughter Miss Marion Tweedy, together and separately on the lounge in Matthew Dillon's house in Roundtown. Once in 1892 and once in 1893 with Julius Judah Mastiansky, on both occasions in the parlour of his Bloom's house in Lombard Street West. What reflection concerning the irregular sequence of dates 1884, 1885, 1886, 1888, 1892, 1893, 1904 did Bloom make before their arrival at their destination? He reflected that the progressive extension of the field of individual development and experience was regressively accompanied by a restriction of the converse domain of inter-individual relations. As in what ways? From inexistence to existence he came to many, and was as one received. Existence with existence he was with any as any with any. From existence to non-existence gone he would be by all as non-perceived. What act did Bloom make on their arrival at their destination? At the house-steps of the fourth of the equidifferent uneven numbers, number 7 Eccles Street, he inserted his hand mechanically into the back pocket of his trousers to obtain his latchkey. Was it there? It was in the corresponding pocket of the trousers which he had worn on the day but one preceding. Why was he doubly irritated? Because he had forgotten, and because he remembered that he had reminded himself twice not to forget. What were then the alternatives before the premeditatedly, respectively, and inadvertently keyless couple? To enter or not to enter, to knock or not to knock. Bloom's decision? A stratagem. Resting his feet on the dwarf wall, he climbed over the area railings, compressed his hat on his head, grasped 2 points at the lower union of rails and stiles, lowered his body gradually by its length of 5 feet 9 inches and a half to within 2 feet 10 inches of the area pavement, and allowed his body to move freely in space by separating himself from the railings and crouching in preparation for the impact of the fall. Did he fall? By his body's known weight of 11 stone and 4 pounds in avoirdupois measure, as certified by the graduated machine for periodical self-weighing at the premises of Francis Frodman, pharmaceutical chemist of 19 Frederick Street North, on the last feast of the Ascension, to wit, the 12th day of May of the bissextile year 1904 of the Christian era, Jewish era 5664, Mohammedan era 1322, golden number 5, epoch 13, solar cycle 9, Dominical letters CB, Roman indication 2, Julian period 6617, MC, MIV. Did he rise uninjured by concussion? Regaining new stable equilibrium, he rose uninjured though concussed by the impact, raised the latch of the area door by the exertion of force at its freely moving flange, and by leverage of the first kind applied at its fulcrum, gained retarded access to the kitchen through the subadjacent scullery. ignited a lucifer match by friction, set free inflammable coal gas by turning on the vent-cock, lit a high flame which, by regulating, he reduced the quiescent candescence, and lit finally a portable candle. What discrete succession of images did Stephen meanwhile perceive? Reclined against the area railings, he perceived through the transparent kitchen panes a man regulating a gas flame of 14 cp, a man lighting a candle of 1 cp, a man removing in turn each of his 2 boots, a man leaving the kitchen holding a candle. Did the man reappear elsewhere? After a lapse of 4 minutes, the glimmer of his candle was discernible through the semi-transparent, semicircular glass fanlight over the hall door. The hall door turned gradually on its hinges. In the open space of the doorway, the man reappeared without his hat, with his candle. Did Stephen obey his sign? Yes. Entering softly, he helped to close and chain the door and followed softly along the hallway the man's back, and listed feet and lighted candle past a lighted crevice of doorway on the left and carefully down a turning staircase of more than 5 steps into the kitchen of Bloom's house. What did Bloom do? He extinguished the candle by a sharp expiration of breath upon its flame, drew 2 spoon-seat deal chairs to the hearthstone, one for Stephen with its back at the area window, the other for himself when necessary, knelt on one knee, composed in the grate a pyre of cross-laid resin-tipped sticks and various coloured papers, and irregular polygons of best Abram coal at 21 shillings a ton from the yard of Messrs. Flower and MacDonald of 14 Dolliver Street, kindled it at 3 projected points of paper with 1 ignited lucifer match, thereby releasing the potential energy contained in the fuel, by allowing its carbon and hydrogen elements to enter into free union with the oxygen of the air. Of what similar apparitions did Stephen think? Of others elsewhere in other times who, kneeling on 1 knee or on 2, had kindled fires for him. Of Brother Michael in the infirmary of the College of the Society of Jesus at Clongiswood, Sallins, in the county of Kildare. Of his father, Simon Dedalus, in an unfurnished room of his first residence in Dublin, No. 13 Fitzgibbon Street. Of his godmother, Miss Kate Morkan, in the house of her dying sister, Miss Julia Morkan, at 15 Usher's Island. Of his Aunt Sarah, wife of Richard Goulding, in the kitchen of their lodgings at 62 Clanbrassil Street. Of his mother Mary, wife of Simon Dedalus, in the kitchen of No. 12 North Richmond Street, in the morning of the feast of St. Francis Xavier, 1898. Of the Dean of Studies, Father Butt, in the Physics Theatre of University College, 16 Stephen's Green North. Of his sister Delia, in his father's house in Cabra. What did Stephen see on raising his gaze to the height of a yard from the fire towards the opposite wall? Under a row of 5 coiled spring house bells, a curvilineal rope stretched between 2 holdfasts athwart across the recess beside the chimney-pier, from which hung 4 small-sized square handkerchiefs, folded unattached consecutively in adjacent rectangles, and 1 pair of ladies' grey hose with lisle suspender tops and feet in their habitual position, clamped by 3 erect wooden pegs, 2 at their outer extremities and a third at their point of junction. What did Bloom see on the range? On the right smaller hob, a blue enamelled saucepan. On the left larger hob, a black iron kettle. What did Bloom do at the range? He removed the saucepan to the left hob, rose and carried the iron kettle to the sink in order to tap the current by turning the faucet to let it flow. Did it flow? Yes, from Roundwood Reservoir in County Wicklow of a cubic capacity of 2,400 million gallons, percolating through a subterranean aqueduct of filter mains of single and double pipage constructed at an initial plant cost of £5 per linear yard, by way of the Dargle, Rathdown, Glen of the Downs, and Callow Hill, to the 26-acre reservoir at Stillorgan, a distance of 22 statute miles, and thence through a system of relieving tanks by a gradient of 250 feet to the city boundary of Eustace Bridge, Upper Leeson Street, though from prolonged summer drought and daily supply of 12.5 million gallons, the water had fallen below the sill of the overflow where, for which reason, the borough surveyor and the waterworks engineer, Mr. Spencer Harty, C.E., on the instructions of the Waterworks Committee, had prohibited the use of municipal water for purposes other than those of consumption, envisaging the possibility of recourse being had to the impotable water of the Grand and Royal Canals as in 1893, particularly as the South Dublin Guardians, notwithstanding their ration of 15 gallons per day per pauper supplied through a 6-inch meter, had been convicted of a wastage of 20,000 gallons per night by a reading of their meter on the affirmation of the law agent of the corporation, Mr. Ignatius Rice, solicitor, thereby acting to the detriment of another section of the public, self-supporting taxpayers, solvent, sound. What in water did Bloom, water-lover, drawer of water, water-carrier, returning to the range, admire? Its universality, its democratic equality and consistency to its nature in seeking its own level, its vastness in the ocean of Mercator's projection, its unplumbed profundity in the sun-dammed trench of the Pacific exceeding 8,000 fathoms, the restlessness of its waves and surface particles visiting in turn all points of its seaboard, the independence of its units, the variability of states of sea, its hydrostatic quiescence in calm, its hydrokinetic turgidity in neap and spring tides, its subsidence after devastation, its sterility in the circumpolar ice caps, Arctic and Antarctic, its climactic and commercial significance, its preponderance of 3-1 over the dry land of the globe, its indisputable hegemony extending in square leagues over all the region below the sub-equatorial Tropic of Capricorn, the multisecular stability of its primal basin, its luteolphus bed, its capacity to dissolve and hold in solution all soluble substances, including millions of tons of the most precious metals, its slow erosions of peninsulas and islands, its persistent formation of homothetic islands, peninsulas, and downward-tending promontories, its alluvial deposits, its weight and volume and density, its imperturbability in lagoons and highland tarns, its graduation of colors in the torrid and temperate and frigid zones, its vehicular ramifications in continental lake-contained streams and confluent ocean-flowing rivers with their tributaries and transoceanic currents, Gulf Streams, north and south equatorial courses, its violence in seaquakes, waterspouts, artesian wells, eruptions, torrents, eddies, freshets, spates, groundswells, watersheds, water partings, geysers, cataracts, whirlpools, maelstroms, inundations, deluges, cloudbursts. Its vast circumterrestrial ahorizontal curve, its secrecy in springs and latent humidity, revealed by rhabdomantic or hygrometric instruments, and exemplified by the well by the hole in the wall at Ashtown Gate, saturation of air, distillation of dew, the simplicity of its composition, 2 constituent parts of hydrogen and 1 constituent part of oxygen, its healing virtues, its buoyancy in the waters of the Dead Sea, its persevering penetrativeness in runnels, gullies, inadequate dams, leaks on shipboard, its properties for cleansing, quenching thirsts and fire, nourishing vegetation, its infallibility as paradigm and paragon, its metamorphosis as vapor, mist, cloud, rain, sleet, snow, hail, its strength in rigid hydrants, its variety of forms in loch and bays and gulfs and bights and guts and lagoons and atolls and archipelagos and sounds and fjords and minches and tidal estuaries and arms of sea, its solidity in glaciers, icebergs, ice floes, its docility in working hydraulic mill-wheels, turbines, dynamos, electric power stations, bleach-works, tanneries, scutch mills, its utility in canals, rivers, if navigable, floating and graving docks, its potentiality derivable from harnessed tides of watercourses falling from level to level, its submarine fauna and flora, an acoustic photophobe, numerically if not literally the inhabitants of the globe, its ubiquity as constituting 90% of the human body, the noxiousness of its effluvia in lacustrine marshes, pestilential fens, faded flower water, stagnant pools in the waning moon. Having set the half-filled kettle on the now burning coals, why did he return to the still-flowing tap? To wash his soiled hands with a partially consumed tablet of Barrington's lemon-flavored soap, to which paper still adhered, bought 13 hours previously for 4d and still unpaid for, in fresh cold never-changing ever-changing water, and dry them, face and hands, in a long red-bordered holland cloth passed over a wooden revolving roller. What reason did Stephen give for declining Bloom's offer? That he was a hydrophobe, hating partial contact by immersion or total by submersion in cold water, his last bath having taken place in the month of October of the preceding year, disliking the aqueous substances of glass and crystal, distrusting aquicities of thought and language. What impeded Bloom from giving Stephen counsel of hygiene and prophylactic, to which should be added suggestions concerning a preliminary wetting of the head and contraction of the muscles with rapid splashing of the face and neck and thoracic and epigastric region in case of sea or river bathing, and parts of the human anatomy most sensitive to cold being the nape, stomach, thenar, or sole of foot. The incompatibility of aquacity with the erratic originality of genius. What additional didactic counsels did he similarly repress? Dietary, concerning the respective percentage of protein and caloric energy in bacon, saltling, and butter, the absence of the former in the last named, and the abundance of the latter in the first named. Which seemed to the host to be the predominant qualities of his guest? Confidence in himself, an equal and opposite power of abandonment and recuperation. What concomitant phenomena took place in the vessel of liquid by the agency of fire? The phenomenon was ebullition, fanned by a constant updraft of ventilation between the kitchen and the chimney flue. Ignition was communicated from the faggots of precombustible fuel to polyhedral masses of bituminous coal, containing in compressed mineral form the foliated fossilized decidua of primal forests, which had in turn derived their vegetative existence from the sun, primal source of heat, radiant, transmitted through omnipresent luminiferous diatherminous ether. Heat, convected, a mode of motion developed by such combustion, was constantly and increasingly conveyed from the source of calorification to the liquid contained in the vessel, being radiated through the uneven, unpolished, dark surface of the metal iron, in part reflected, in part absorbed, in part transmitted, gradually raising the temperature of the water from normal to boiling point, a rise in temperature expressible as the result of an expenditure of 72 thermal units needed to raise 1 pound of water from 50 degrees to 212 degrees Fahrenheit. What announced the accomplishment of this rise in temperature? A double falciform ejection of water vapor from under the kettle lid at both sides simultaneously. For what personal purpose could Bloom have applied the water so boiled? To shave himself. What advantages attended shaving by night? A softer beard, a softer brush if intentionally allowed to remain from shave to shave in its agglutinated lather, a softer skin if unexpectedly encountering female acquaintances in remote places in uncustomary hours, quiet reflections upon the course of the day, a cleaner sensation when awakening after a fresher sleep, since matutinal noises, premonitions and perturbations, a clattered milk can, a postman's double knock, a paper read, reread while lathering, relathering the same spot, a shock, a shoot, with thought of aught he sought, though fraught with naught, might cause a faster rate of shaving, and a nick on which incision plaster with precision cut and humected and applied adhered, which was to be done. Why did absence of light disturb him less than presence of noise? Because of the surety of the sense of touch in his firm, full, masculine-feminine passive-active hand. What did it, his hand, possess, but with what counteracting influence? The operative surgical quality, but that he was reluctant to shed human blood, even when the end justified the means, preferring in their natural order heliotherapy, psychophysicotherapeutics, osteopathic surgery. What lay under exposure on the lower, middle, and upper shelves of the kitchen dresser, opened by Bloom? On the lower shelf, 5 vertical breakfast plates, 6 horizontal breakfast saucers on which rested inverted breakfast cups, a mustache cup uninverted and saucer of Crown Derby, 4 white gold-rimmed egg cups, an open chamois purse displaying coins, mostly copper, and a vial of aromatic violet comfits. On the middle shelf, a chipped egg cup containing pepper, a drum of table salt, 4 conglomerated black olives in oleaginous paper, an empty pot of Plumtree's potted meat, an oval wicker basket bedded with fibre and containing 1 Jersey pear, a half-empty bottle of William Gilby and Company's white invalid port, half disrobed of its swathe of coral-pink tissue paper, a packet of Epps soluble cocoa, 5 ounces of Anne Lynch's choice tea at 2 shillings per pound in a crinkled lead-paper bag, a cylindrical canister containing the best crystallized lump sugar, 2 onions, one, the larger Spanish, entire, the other smaller, Irish, bisected with augmented surface and more redolent, a jar of Irish model dairy's cream, a jug of brown crockery containing a naggin and a quarter of soured adulterated milk, converted by heat into water, acidulous serum and semi-solidified curds, which added to the quantity subtracted for Mr. Bloom's and Mrs. Fleming's breakfasts, made 1 imperial pint, the total quantity originally delivered, 2 cloves, a halfpenny, and a small dish containing a slice of fresh ribsteak. On the upper shelf a battery of jam jars, empty, of various sizes and provenances. What attracted his attention lying on the apron of the dresser? 4 polygonal fragments of 2 lacerated scarlet betting tickets, numbered 887, 88-6. What reminiscences temporarily corrugated his brow? Reminiscences of coincidences, truth stranger than fiction, pre-indicative of the result of the Gold Cup flat handicap, the official and definite results of which he had read in the Evening Telegram, late pink edition, in the cabman's shelter at Butt Bridge. Where had previous intimations of the result, affected or projected, been received by him? In Bernard Kierman's licensed premise 8, 9, and 10 Little Britain Street, in David Burns' licensed premise 14 Duke Street, in O'Connell Street Lower, outside Graham Lemon's, when a dark man had placed in his hand a throwaway, subsequently thrown away, advertising Elijah, restorer of the Church of Zion, in Lincoln Place, outside the premises of F. W. Sweeney and Company, Limited, dispensing chemists, when Frederick M. Bantam Lyons had rapidly and successively requested, perused, and reconstituted the copy of the current issue of the Freeman's Journal and National Press, which he had been about to throw away, subsequently thrown away. He had proceeded towards the oriental edifice of the Turkish and Warm Baths, 11 Leinster Street, with the light of inspiration shining in his countenance and bearing in his arms the secret of the race, graven in the language of prediction. What qualifying considerations allayed his perturbations? The difficulties of interpretation, since the significance of any event followed its occurrence as variably as the acoustic report followed the electrical discharge, and counterestimating against an actual loss by failure to interpret the total sum of possible losses proceeding originally from a successful interpretation. His mood? He had not risked. He did not expect. He had not been disappointed. He was satisfied. What satisfied him? To have gained no positive loss, to have brought a positive gain to others, light to the Gentiles. How did Bloom prepare a collation for a Gentile? He poured into 2 teacups 2 level spoonfuls, 4 in all, of Epps soluble cocoa, and proceeded, according to the directions for use printed on the label, to each adding, after sufficient time for infusion, the prescribed ingredients for diffusion, in the manner and in the quantity prescribed. What supererogatory remarks of special hospitality did the host show his guest? Relinquishing his symposiarchal right to the mustache cup of imitation Crown Derby presented to him by his only daughter, Millicent Millie, he substituted a cup identical with that of his guest, and served extraordinarily to his guest and, in reduced measure, to himself, the viscous cream ordinarily reserved for the breakfast of his wife, Marian, Molly. Was the guest conscious of, and did he acknowledge these marks of hospitality? His attention was directed to them by his host jocosely, and he accepted them seriously as they drank in jocose serious silence Epps' mass-produced The Creature Cocoa. Were there marks of hospitality which he contemplated but suppressed, reserving them for another and for himself on future occasions to complete the act begun? The reparation of a fissure of the length of 1½ inches in the right side of his guest's pocket, a gift to his guest of one of the 4 ladies' handkerchiefs, if and when ascertained to be in a presentable condition. Who drank more quickly? Bloom, having the advantage of 10 seconds at the initiation and taking, from the concave surface of a spoon, along the handle of which a steady flow of heat was conducted, 3 sips to his opponent's 1, 6-2, 9-3. What celebration accompanied his frequentative act? Concluding by inspection, but erroneously, that his silent companion was engaged in mental composition,
He reflected on the pleasures derived from literature of instruction rather than of amusement, as he himself had applied to the works of William Shakespeare more than once for the solution of difficult problems in imaginary or real life. Had he found their solution? In spite of careful and repeated reading of certain classical passages, aided by a glossary, he had derived imperfect convictions from the text, the answers not bearing in all points. What lines concluded his first piece of original verse written by him, potential poet, at the age of 11 in 1877, on the occasion of the offering of 3 prizes of 10 shillings, 5 shillings, and 2 shillings 6 respectively for competition by the Shamrock, a weekly newspaper. An ambition to squint at my verses in print makes me hope that for these you'll find room. If you so condescend, then please place at the end the name of yours truly, L. Bloom. Did he find 4 separating forces between his temporary guest and him? Name, age, race, creed. What anagrams had he made on his name in youth? Leopold Bloom, Elpod Bomol, Moldoplope, Bolopidum, Old Olibo, M.P. What acrostic upon the abbreviation of his first name had he, kinetic poet, sent to Miss Marion, Molly, Tweedy on the 14th February, 1888?
Poets oft have sung in rhyme, of music sweet their praise divine. Let them hymn it 9 times 9. Dearer far than song or wine, you are mine. The world is mine.
What had prevented him from completing a topical song, music by R.G. Johnson, on the events of the past or fixtures for the actual years, entitled If Brian Boru Could But Come Back and See Old Dublin Now, commissioned by Michael Gunn, lessee of the Gaiety Theatre, 46, 47, 48, 49 South King Street, and to be introduced into the 6th scene, the Valley of Diamonds, of the 2nd edition, 30 January 1893, of the grand annual Christmas pantomime Sinbad the Sailor, produced by R. Shelton, 26 December 1892, written by Greenleaf Whittier, scenery by George A. Jackson and Cecil Hicks, costumes by Mrs. and Miss Whelan under the personal supervision of Mrs. Michael Gunn, ballads by Nessie Noir, harlequinade by Thomas Otto, and sung by Nellie Bovervist, principal girl. Firstly, oscillation between events of imperial and local interest. The anticipated Diamond Jubilee of Queen Victoria, born 1820, assented 1837, and the posticipated opening of the new municipal fish market. Secondly, apprehension of opposition from extreme circles on the question of the respective visits of their Royal Highnesses the Duke and Duchess of York, real, and of His Majesty King Brian Boru, imaginary. Thirdly, a conflict between professional etiquette and professional emulation concerning the recent erections of the Grand Lyric Hall on Burgh Quay and the Royal Theatre in Hawkins Street. Fourthly, distraction resultant from compassion for Nellie Bovervist's non-intellectual, non-political, non-topical expression of countenance, and concupiscence caused by Nellie Bovervist's revelations of white articles of non-intellectual, non-political, non-topical underclothing, while she, Nellie Bovervist, was in the articles. Fifthly, the difficulties of the selection of appropriate music and humorous allusions from Everybody's Book of Jokes, 1,000 pages and a laugh on every one. Sixthly, the rhymes, homophonous and cacophonous, associated with the names of the new Lord Mayor, Daniel Tallon, the new High Sheriff, Thomas Pyle, and the new Solicitor General, Dunbar Pluckett Barton. What relation existed between their ages? 16 years before, in 1888, when Bloom was of Stephen's present age, Stephen was 6. 16 years after, in 1820, when Stephen would be of Bloom's present age, Bloom would be 54. In 1936, when Bloom would be 70, Stephen 54. Their ages, initially in the ratio of 16:0, would be as 17.5 to 13.5. The proportion increasingly and the disparity diminishing according as arbitrary future years were added. For if the proportion existed in 1883 and continued immutable, conceiving that to be possible, till then 1904, when Stephen was 22, Bloom would be 374, and in 1920, when Stephen would be 38, as Bloom then was, Bloom would be 646, while in 1952, when Stephen would have attained the maximum post-alluvial age of 70, Bloom being 1190 years alive, having been born in the year 714, would have surpassed by 221 years the maximum antediluvial age, that of Methuselah, 969 years, while if Stephen would continue to live until he would attain that age in the year 3072 A.D., Bloom would have been obliged to have been alive 83,300 years, having been obliged to have been born in the year 81,396 B.C. What events might nullify these calculations? The cessation of existence of both or either, the inauguration of a new era or calendar, the annihilation of the world and consequent extermination of the human species, inevitable but unpredictable. How many previous encounters prove their pre-existing acquaintance? 2. The first in the lilac garden of Matthew Dillon's house, Medina Villa, Kimmage Road, Roundtown, in 1887, in the company of Stephen's mother, Stephen being then of the age 5 and reluctant to give his hand in salutation. The second in the coffee-room of Breslin's Hotel on a rainy Sunday in the January of 1892, in the company of Stephen's father and Stephen's grand-uncle, Stephen being then 5 years older. Did Bloom accept the invitation to dinner given then by the son and afterwards seconded by the father? Very gratefully, with grateful appreciation, with sincere appreciative gratitude, in appreciatively grateful sincerity of regret, he declined. Did their conversation on the subject of these reminiscences reveal a third connecting link between them? Mrs. Reardon, Dante, a widow of independent means, had resided in the house of Stephen's parents from 1st September 1888 to 29 December 1891, and had also resided during the years 1892, 1893, and 1894 in the City Arms Hotel owned by Elizabeth O'Dowd of 54 Prussian Street, where, during parts of the year 1893 and 1894, she had been a constant informant of Bloom, who resided also in the same hotel, being at that time a clerk in the employment of Joseph Cuffey of 5 Smithfield for the superintendence of sales in the adjacent Dublin cattle market on the North Circular Road. Had he performed any special corporal work of mercy for her? He had sometimes propelled her on warm summer evenings, an infirm widow of independent if limited means, in her convalescent bath-chair with slow revolutions of its wheels as far as the corner of the North Circular Road opposite Mr. Gavin Lowe's place of business, where she had remained for a certain time scanning through his one-lensed binocular field glasses unrecognizable citizens on tramcars, roadster bicycles equipped with inflatable pneumatic tires, hackney carriages, tandems, private and hired landaus, dog carts, pony traps, and brakes passing from the city to the Phoenix Park, and vice versa. Why could he then support that his vigil with a greater equanimity? Because in middle youth he had often sat observing through a rondel of bossed glass of a multicolored pane the spectacle offered with continual changes of the thoroughfare without, pedestrians, quadrupeds, velocipedes, vehicles, passing slowly, quickly, evenly, round and round and round the rim of a round and round precipitous globe. What distinct different memories had each of her, now 8 years deceased? The older, her bezique cards and counters, her Skye Terrier, her supposititious wealth, her lapses of responsiveness and incipient catarrh deafness. The younger, her lamp of colza oil before the statue of the Immaculate Conception, her green and maroon brushes for Charles Stewart Parnell and for David Davitt, her tissue papers. Were there no means still remaining to him to achieve the rejuvenation which these reminiscences divulged to a younger companion rendered the more desirable? The indoor exercises, formerly intermittently practiced, subsequently abandoned, prescribed in Edward Sanchow's Physical Strength and How to Obtain It, which, designed particularly for commercial men engaged in sedimentary occupations, were to be made with mental concentration in front of a mirror so as to bring into play the various families of muscles and produce successfully a pleasant rigidity, a more pleasant relaxation, and the most pleasant repristination of juvenile agility. Had any special agility been his in earlier youth? Though ring-weight lifting had been beyond his strength, and the full-circle gyration beyond his courage, yet as a high school scholar he had excelled in his stable and protracted execution of the half-lever movement on the parallel bars in consequence of his abnormally developed abdominal muscles. Did either openly allude to their racial difference? Neither. What reduced to their simplest reciprocal form were Bloom's thoughts about Stephen's thoughts about Bloom, and about Stephen's thoughts about Bloom's thoughts about Stephen. He thought that he was a Jew, whereas he knew that he knew that he knew that he was not. What, the enclosure of reticence removed, were their respective parentages? Bloom, only born male transubstantial heir of Rudolf Virag, subsequently Rudolf Bloom, of Szombathely, Vienna, Budapest, Milan, London, and Dublin, of Ellen Higgins, second daughter of Julius Higgins, born Caroli, and Fanny Higgins, born Hegarty, Stephen, eldest surviving male, consubstantial heir of Simon Dedalus of Cork and Dublin, and of Mary, daughter of Richard and Christina Goulding, born Greer. Had Bloom and Stephen been baptized, and where and by whom, cleric or layman? Bloom, 3 times, by the Reverend Mr. Gilmer Johnson, M.A., alone in the Protestant Church of St. Nicholas without, Coombe, by James O'Connor, Philip Gilligan, and James Fitzpatrick together, under a pump in the village of Swords, and by the Reverend Charles Malone, C.C., in the Church of the Three Patrons, Rathgar. Stephen, once, by the Reverend Charles Malone, C.C., alone, in the Church of the Three Patrons, Rathgar. Did they find their educational careers similar? Substituting Stephen for Bloom Stoom would have passed successively through a dam school and the high school. Substituting Bloom for Stephen Bleefen would have passed successively through the preparatory, junior, middle, and senior grades of the intermediate and through the matriculation, fine arts and second arts and arts degree courses of the Royal University. Why did Bloom refrain from stating that he had frequented the University of Life? Because of his fluctuating incertitude as to whether this observation had or had not already been made by him to Stephen or by Stephen to him.
What two temperaments did they individually represent? The scientific, the artistic. What proofs did Bloom adduce to prove that his tendency was towards applied rather than towards pure science? Certain possible inventions of which he had cogitated when reclining in a state of supine repletion to aid digestion, stimulated by his appreciation of the importance of inventions now common but once revolutionary, for example, the aeronautic parachute, the reflecting telescope, the spiral corkscrew, the safety pin, the mineral water siphon, the canal lock with winch and sluice, the suction pump. Were these inventions principally intended for an improved scheme of kindergarten? Yes, rendering obsolete popguns, elastic air bladders, games of hazard, catapults. They comprised astronomical kaleidoscopes exhibiting the 12 constellations of the zodiac from Aries to Pisces, miniature mechanical orreries, arithmetical gelatin lozenges, geometrical to correspond with zoological biscuits, globe map playing balls, historically costumed dolls.
What also stimulated his cogitations? The financial success achieved by Ephraim Marx and Charles A. James, the former by his 1-pence bazaar at 42 George's Street South, the latter his 6 shillings halfpence shop and World's Fancy Fair and Waxwork exhibition at 30 Henry Street, admission 2-pence, children 1-pence, and the infinite possibilities hitherto unexploited of the modern art of advertisement, if condensed in triliteral monoidal symbols, vertically in maximum visibility, divided, horizontally of maximum legibility, deciphered, and of magnetizing efficacy to arrest involuntary attention, to interest, to convince, to decide.
Such as K2 Kino's 11 shillings trousers, House of Keys, Alexander J. Keys. Such as not. Look at this long candle. Calculate when it burns out and you receive gratis 1 pair of our special non-compo boots, guaranteed 1 candle power. Address, Barclay and Cook, 18 Talbot Street. Basilical insect powder, Verbibest boot blacking. You want it, combined pocket 2-blade penknife with corkscrew nail file and pipe cleaner. Such as never. What is home without Plumtree's potted meat? Incomplete. With it an abode of bliss. Manufactured by George Plumtree, 23 Merchants Quay, Dublin. Put up in 4-ounce pots and inserted by Councillor Joseph P. Nanetti, M.P., Rotunda Ward, 18 Hardwicke Street, under the obituary notices and anniversaries of deceases. The name on the label is Plumtree. A Plumtree in a meat pot, registered trademark. Beware of imitations. Peatmot, Trumbleplea, Moutpat, Plamtrue. What example did he adduce to induce Stephen to deduce that originality, though producing its own reward, does not invariably conduce to success? His own ideated and rejected project of an illuminated show-cart, drawn by a beast of burden, in which 2 smartly dressed girls were to be seated engaged in writing. What suggested scene was then constructed by Stephen? Solitary hotel in Mountain Pass, autumn, twilight, firelight, in dark corner young man seated, young woman enters, restless, solitary, she sits, she goes to window, she stands, she sits, twilight, She thinks. On solitary hotel paper she writes. She thinks. She writes. She sighs. Wheels and hoofs. She hurries out. He comes from his dark corner. He seizes solitary paper. He holds it towards fire. Twilight. He reads. Solitary. What? In sloping, upright, and backhands. Queen's Hotel, Queen's Hotel, Queen's Hotel, Queen's Ho... What suggested scene was then reconstructed by Bloom? The Queen's Hotel, Ennis, County Clare, where Rudolph Bloom, Rudolph Verag, died on the evening of 27 June 1886 at some hour unstated, in consequence of an overdose of monkshood, aconite, self-administered in the form of a neuralgic liniment composed of 2 parts of aconite liniment to 1 of chloroform liniment, purchased by him at 10:20 a.m. in the morning of 27 June 1886 at the Medical Hall of Francis Dennehy, 17 Church Street, Ennis, after having, though not in consequence of having, purchased at 3:15 p.m. on the afternoon of 27 June 1886 a new boater straw hat, extra smart, after having, though not in consequence of having, purchased at the hour and in the place aforesaid, the tocsin aforesaid, at the general drapery store of James Cullen, 4 Main Street, Ennis. Did he contribute this homonymity to information or coincidence or intuition? Coincidence. Did he depict the scene verbally for his guest to see? He preferred himself to see another's face and listen to another's words, by which potential narration was realized and kinetic temperament relieved. Did he see only a second coincidence in the second scene narrated to him, described by the narrator as a Pisic sight of Palestine or the parable of the palms? It, with the preceding scenes and with others unnarrated but existent by implication, to which add essays or various subjects or moral apothegms, e.g., my favorite hero or procrastination is the thief of time, composed during school years, seemed to him to contain in itself and in conjunction with the personal equations certain possibilities of financial, social, personal, and sexual success, whether specially collected and selected as model pedagogic themes of cent per cent merit for the use of preparatory and junior grade students, or contributed in printed form, following the precedent of Philip Beaufoy or Dr. Dick or Hebland's Studies in Blue, to a publication of certified circulation and solvency, or employed verbally as intellectual stimulations for sympathetic auditors, tacitly appreciative of successful narrative and confidently augurated of successful achievement during the increasingly longer nights gradually following the summer solstice on the day but 3 following Vedi Licet, Tuesday 21st June, S. Aloysius Gonzaga, sunrise 3:33 a.m., sunset 8:29 p.m. Which domestic problem as much as, if not more than any other, frequently engaged his mind? What to do with our wives? What had been his hypothetical singular solutions? Parlour games, dominoes, halma, tiddlywinks, spillikins, cup and ball, nap, spoil 5, bezique 25, beggar my neighbour, draughts, chess or backgammon, embroidery, darning or knitting for the police-aided clothing society, musical duets, mandolin and guitar, piano and flute, guitar and piano, legal scrivery or envelope addressing, bi-weekly visits to variety entertainments, commercial activity as pleasantly commanding and pleasantly obeyed mistress proprietress in a cool dairy shop or warm cigar divan, the clandestine satisfaction of erotic irritation in masculine brothels, state-inspected and medically controlled, social visits, at regular infrequent prevented intervals and with regular frequent preventative superintendence, to and from female acquaintances of recognized respectability in the vicinity, courses of evening instruction specially designed to render liberal instruction agreeable. What instances of deficient mental development in his wife inclined him in favor of the last-mentioned ninth solution? In disoccupied moments she had more than once covered a sheet of paper with signs and hieroglyphics which he stated were Greek and Irish and Hebrew characters. She had interrogated constantly at varying intervals as to the correct method of writing the capital initial of the name of the city in Canada, Quebec. She understood little of political complications, internal or balance of power, external. In calculating the addenda of bills, she frequently had recourse to digital aid. After completion of laconic epistolary compositions, she abandoned the implement of calligraphy in the encaustic pigment, exposed to the corrosive action of copperas, green vitriol, and night-gall. Unusual polysyllables of foreign origin she interpreted phonetically, or by false analogy, or by both. Metempsychosis, met him pike hoses, alias, mendacious person mentioned in sacred scripture. What compensated in the false balance of her intelligence for these and such deficiencies of judgment regarding persons, places, and things? The false apparent parallelism of all perpendicular arms of all balances, proved true by construction. The counterbalance of her proficiency of judgment regarding one person proved true by experiment. How had he attempted to remedy this state of comparative ignorance? Variously. By leaving in a conspicuous place a certain book opened at a certain page, by assuming in her, when alluding explanatorily, latent knowledge, by open ridicule in her presence of some absent other's ignorant lapse. With what success had he attempted direct instruction? She followed not at all a part of the whole, gave attention with interest comprehended with surprise, with care repeated, with greater difficulty remembered, forgot with ease, with misgiving re-remembered, repeated with error. What system had proved more effective? Indirect suggestion implicating self-interest. Example. She disliked umbrella with rain. He liked women with umbrella. She disliked new hat with rain. He liked women with new hat. He brought new hat with rain. She carried umbrella with new hat. Accepting the analogy implied in his guest's parable, which examples of post-exilic eminence did he adduce? 3 seekers of the pure truth. Moses of Egypt, Moses Maimonides, author of More Nebuchim, Guide of the Perplexed, and Moses Mendelssohn, of such eminence that from Moses of Egypt to Moses Mendelssohn there arose none like Moses Maimonides. What statement was made, under correction, by Bloom concerning a 4th seeker of pure truth by name Aristotle, mentioned with permission by Stephen? That the seeker mentioned had been a pupil of a rabbinical philosopher, name uncertain. Were other and apocryphal illustrious sons of the law and children of a selected or rejected race mentioned? Felix Bartholdy Mendelssohn, composer. Baruch Spinoza, philosopher. Mendoza, pugilist. Ferdinand Lassalle, reformer, dualist. What fragments of verse from the ancient Hebrew and ancient Irish languages were cited with modulations of voice and translation of texts by guest to host and by host to guest? By Stephen, Sul Sularun, Sul go shukar agus sugokun. Walk, walk, walk your way, walk in safety, walk with care. By Bloom, Kiflach harman rachti nicht bahad lachthemet. Thy temple amid thy hair is as a slice of pomegranate. How was a glyphic comparison of the phonic symbols of both languages made in substantiation of the oral comparison? By juxtaposition. On the penultimate blank page of a book of inferior literary style entitled Sweets of Sin, produced by Bloom and so manipulated that its front cover came in contact with the surface of the table, with a pencil supplied by Stephen wrote the Irish characters for G, A, D, M, simple and modified, and Bloom in turn wrote the Hebrew characters Gimel, Aleph, Daleth, and, in the absence of Mem, a substitute Quaf, explaining their arithmetical values as ordinal and cardinal numbers, vide licit 3, 1, 4, and 100. Was the knowledge possessed by both of each of these languages, the extinct and the revived, theoretical or practical? Theoretical, being confined to certain grammatical rules of accidence and syntax and practically excluding vocabulary. What points of contact existing between these languages and between the peoples who spoke them? The presence of guttural sounds, diacritic aspirations, epenthetic and servile letters in both languages. Their antiquity, both having been taught on the plain of Shinar 242 years after the deluge in the seminary instituted by Phineas Pharseg, descendant of Noah, progenitor of Israel, and descendant of Heber and Heremon, progenitors of Ireland. Their archaeological, geological, hagiographical, exegetical, homiletic, toponomastic, historical and religious literatures comprising the works of rabbis and Chaldees, Torah, Talmud, Misnach and Gemara, Masor, Pentateuch, Book of the Dung Cow, Book of Alimut, Garland of Howth, Book of Kells, their dispersal, persecution, survival and revival, the isolation of their synagogal and ecclesiastical rites in Ghetto, St. Mary's Abbey, and Mass House, Adam and Eve's Tavern, the proscription of their national costumes in penal laws and Jewish dress acts, the restoration in Chana David of Zion, and the possibility of Irish political autonomy or devolution. What anthem did Bloom chant partially in anticipation of that multiple, ethnically irreducible consummation? Kolod, Balijwa, Nima, Nefish, Yehuda, Chomidya. Why was the chant arrested in the conclusion of his first distich? In consequence of defective mnemotechnic. How did the chanter compensate for this deficiency? By a paraphrasic version of the general text. In what common study did their mutual reflections merge? The increasing simplification traceable from the Egyptian epigraphic hieroglyphics to the Greek and Roman alphabets, and the anticipation of modern stenography and telegraphic code in the cuneiformic inscriptions, Semitic, and the virgular Quin-Caicoscate Ogham writing, Celtic. Did the guest comply with his host's request? Doubly, by appending his signature in Irish and Roman characters. What was Stephen's auditive sensation? He heard in a profound ancient male unfamiliar melody the accumulation of the past. What was Bloom's visual sensation? He saw in a quick young male familiar form the predestination of a future. What were Stephen's and Bloom's quasi-simultaneous volitional quasi-sensations of concealed identities? Visually, Stephen's. Visually Stephen's, The traditional figure of hypostasis, depicted by Johannes Damascenus, Lentulus Romanus, and Epiphanes Monachus, as leucodermic, sesquipedalian with wine-dark hair. Auditively, blooms, the traditional accent of the ecstasy of catastrophe. What future careers had been possible for Bloom in the past, and with what exemplars? In the Church, Roman, Anglican, or Nonconformist, exemplars, the Very Reverend John Comey, S.J., the Reverend T. Salmon, D.D., Provost of Trinity College, Dr. Alexander J. Dowie. At the bar, English or Irish, exemplars Seymour Bushe, K.C., Rufus Isaacs, K.C. On the stage, modern or Shakespearean, exemplars Charles Wyndham, High Comedian Osmond Turle, died 1901, exponent of Shakespeare. Did the host encourage his guests to chant in a modulated voice a strange legend in an Did the host encourage his guests to chant in a modulated voice a strange legend on an allied theme? Reassuringly, their place, where none could hear them talk, being secluded, reassured, the decocted beverages, allowing for subsolid residual sediment of a mechanical mixture, water plus sugar plus cream plus cocoa, having been consumed. Recite the first major part of this chanted legend. Little Harry Hughes and his schoolfellows all went out for to play ball. And the very first ball little Harry Hughes played, he drove it o'er the Jew's garden wall. And the very second ball little Harry Hughes played, he broke the Jew's windows all. How did the son of Rudolph receive this first part? With mixed feeling. Smiling, a Jew he heard with pleasure, and saw the unbroken kitchen window. Recite the second part, minor, of the legend. Then out there came the Jew's daughter, and she all dressed in green. Come back, you pretty little boy, and play your ball again. I can't come back, and I won't come back, without my schoolfellows all. For if my master he did hear, he'd make it a sorry ball. She took him by the lily-white hand, and led him along the hall, until she led him to a room where none could hear him call. She took a penknife out her pocket and cut off his little head. And now he'll play his ball no more, for he lies among the dead. How did the father of Millicent receive this second part? With mixed feelings. Unsmiling, he heard and saw with wonder a Jew's daughter all dressed in green. Condense Stephen's commentary. One of all, and least of all, is the victim predestined. Once by inadvertence, once by design, he challenges his destiny. It comes when he is abandoned and challenges him reluctant and, as an apparition of hope and youth, holds him unrestraining. It leads him to a strange habitation, to a secret infidel apartment, and there, implacable, emulates him, consenting. Why was the host, victim predestined, sad? He wished that a tale of a deed should be told of a deed not by him, should by him not be told. Why was the host, reluctant, unresisting, still? In accordance with the law of the conservation of energy. Why was the host, secret infidel, silent? He weighed the possible evidences for and against ritual murder, the inclinations of the hierarchy, the superstition of the populace, the propagation of rumor in continued fraction of verdicity, the envy of opulence, the influence of retaliation,
the sporadic reappearance of atavistic delinquency, the mitigating circumstances of fanaticism, hypnotic suggestion, and somnambulism. From which, if any, of these mental or physical disorders was he not totally immune? From hypnotic suggestion. Once, walking, he had not recognized his sleeping apartment. More than once, walking, he had been for an indefinite time incapable of moving or uttering sounds. From somnambulism. Once sleeping, his body had risen, crouched and crawled in the direction of a heatless fire, and, having attained its destination, there curled, unheeded, in night attire had lain, sleeping. Had this latter or any cognate phenomenon declared itself in any member of his family? Twice in Hull Street and in Ontario Terrace, his daughter Millicent, Millie, at the ages of 6 and 8 years, had uttered in sleep an exclamation of terror and had replied to the interrogations of two figures in night attire with a vacant, mute expression. What other infantile memories had he of her? 15 June 1889. A querulous newborn female infant crying to cause and lessen congestion. A child named Paddy Socks she took with her shocks her money-box. Counted his 3 free money-penny buttons, 1 tlee, a doll, a boy, a sailor she cast away. Blonde, born of too dark, she had blonde ancestry, remote, a violation, Herr Hauptmann Hainau, Austrian Army, proximate, a hallucination, Lieutenant Mulvey, British Navy. What endemic characteristics were present? Conversely, the nasal and frontal formation was derived in a direct line of lineage which, though interrupted, would continue at distant intervals to more distant intervals to its most distant intervals. What memories had he of her adolescence? She relegated her hoop and skipping rope to a recess. On the Duke's lawn, entreated by an English visitor, she declined to permit him to make and take away her photographic image, objection not stated. On the South Circular Road, in the company of Elsa Potter, followed by an individual of sinister aspect, she went halfway down Stammer Street and turned abruptly back, reason of change not stated. On the vigil of the 15th anniversary of her birth, she wrote a letter from Mullingar, County Westmeath, making a brief allusion to a local student, faculty and year not stated. Did this first division, portending a second division, afflict him? Less than he had imagined, more than he had hoped. What second departure was contemporaneously perceived by him similarly, if differently? A temporary departure of his cat. Why similar, why differently? Similarly, because actuated by a secret purpose, the quest of a new male, Mullingar student, or of a healing herb, valerian. Differently because of different possible returns to the inhabitants or to the habituation. In other respects, were their differences similar? In passivity, in economy, in the instinct of tradition, in unexpectedness. As? Inasmuch as leaning, she sustained her blonde hair for him to ribbon it for her. Cf. neck-arching cat. Moreover, on the free surface of the lake in Stephen's Green, amid inadverted reflections of trees, her uncommented spit, describing concentric circles of waterings, indicated by the constancy of its permanence the locus of a somnambulant prostrate fish, cf. mouse-watching cat. Again, in order to remember the date, combatants, issue and consequences of a famous military engagement, she pulled a plait of her hair, cf. ear-washing cat. Furthermore, silly Millie, she dreamed of having had an unspoken, unremembered conversation with a horse, whose name had been Joseph, to whom, which, she had offered a tumblerful of lemonade, which he, had appeared to have accepted, cf. Hearth-dreaming cats. Hence, in passivity, in economy, in the instinct of tradition, in unexpectedness, their differences were similar. In what way had he utilized gifts 1, an owl, 2, a clock, given as matrimonial auguries, to interest and to instruct her? As object lessons to explain. 1. The nature and habit of oviparous animals, the possibility of aerial flight, certain abnormalities of vision, the secular process of embalsamation. 2. The principle of the pendulum, exemplified in bob, wheel gear, and regulator. The translation in terms of human or social regulation of the various positions of clockwise movable indicators on a unmoving dial. The exactitude of the reoccurrence per hour of an instant in each hour when the longer and the shorter indicators were at the same angle of inclination. Vidilicet 5/11 minutes past each hour per hour in arithmetical progression. In what manners did she reciprocate? She remembered. On the 27th anniversary of his birth, she presented to him a breakfast mustache cup of imitation Crown Derby porcelainware. She provided. At quarter-day of thereabouts, if or when purchases had been made by him not for her, she showed herself attentive to his necessities, anticipating his desires. She admired. A natural phenomenon having been explained by him to her, she expressed the immediate desire to possess without gradual acquisition a fraction of his science, the moiety, the quarter, 1,000th part. What proposal did Bloom, diambulist, father of Milly, somnambulist, make to Stephen, noctambulist? To pass in repose the hours intervening between Thursday proper and Friday normal on an extemporized cubicle in the apartment immediately above the kitchen and immediately adjacent to the sleeping apartment of his host and hostess. What various advantages would or might have resulted from a prolongation of such an extemporization? For the guest, security of domicile and seclusion of study. For the host, rejuvenation of intelligence, vicarious satisfaction. For the hostess, disintegration of obsession, acquisition of correct Italian pronunciation. Why might these several provisional contingencies between a guest and a hostess not necessarily preclude or be precluded by a permanent eventuality of reconciliatory union between a schoolfellow and a Jew's daughter? Because the way to a daughter led through a mother, the way to a mother through a daughter. To what inconsistent polysyllabic question of his host did the guest return a monosyllabic negative answer? If he had known the late Mrs. Emily Sinico, accidentally killed at Sydney Parade Railway Station, 14 October 1903. What inchoate corollary statement was consequently suppressed by the host? A statement explanatory of his absence on the occasion of the interment of Mrs. Mary Dedalus, born Goulding, 26 June 1903, vigil of the anniversary of the decease of Rudolph Bloom, born Virag. Was the proposal of asylum accepted? Promptly, inexplicably, with amicability, gratefully it was declined. What exchange of money took place between host and guest? The former returned to the latter without interest the sum of £1 7 shillings, £1 7 shillings sterling, advanced by the latter to the former. What counter-proposals were alternately advanced, accepted, modified, declined, restated in other terms, reaccepted, ratified, reconfirmed? To inaugurate a prearranged course of Italian instruction, place the residence of the instructed. To inaugurate a course of vocal instruction, place the residence of the instructress. To inaugurate a series of static, semi-static, and peripatetic intellectual dialogues, places the residence of both speakers, if both speakers were resident in the same place. The Ship, Hotel and Tavern, 6 Lower Abbey Street, W&E Connery Proprietors. The National Library of Ireland, 10 Kildare Street. The National Maternity Hospital, 29, 30 and 31 Holles Street. A public garden. The vicinity of a place of worship. A conjunction of 2 or more public thoroughfares. The point of bisection of a right line drawn between these 2 residences, if both speakers were resident in different places. What rendered problematic for Bloom the realization of these mutually self-excluding propositions? The irreparability of the past. Once at a performance of Albert Hengler's Circus in the Rotunda, Rutland Square, Dublin, an intuitive party-coloured clown in quest of paternity had penetrated from the ring to a place in the auditorium where Bloom, solitary, was seated and had publicly declared to an exhilarated audience that he, Bloom, was his, the clown's, papa. The imprevedibility of the future. Once in the summer of 1898 he, Bloom, had marked a florin with 3 notches on the milled edge and tendered it in payment of an account due to and received by J&T Davy, family grocers, 1 Charlemont Hall, Grand Canal, for circulation on the waters of civil finance, for possible, circuitous, or direct return. Was the clown Bloom's son? No. Had Bloom's coin returned? Never. Why would a recurrent frustration the more depress him? Because at the critical turning point of human existence he desired to amend many social conditions, the product of inequality and avarice and international animosity. He believed that human life was infinitely perfectible, eliminating these conditions. There remain the generic conditions imposed by nature, as distinct from human law, as integral parts of the human whole, the necessity of destruction to procure alimentary sustenance, the painful character of the ultimate functions of separate existence, the agonies of birth and death, the monotonous menstruation of simian and particularly human females extending from the age of puberty to the menopause, inevitable accidents at sea, in mines and factories, certain very painful maladies and their resultant surgical operations, innate lunacy and congenital criminality, decimating epidemics, catastrophic cataclysms which make terror the basis of human mentality, seismic upheavals, the epicenters of which are located in densely populated regions, the fact of vital growth through convulsions and metamorphosis from infancy through maturity to decay. Why did he desist from speculation? Because it was a task for a superior intelligence to substitute other more acceptable phenomenon in the place of the less acceptable phenomenon to be removed. Did Stephen participate in his dejection? He affirmed his significance as a conscious rational animal proceeding syllogistically from the known to the unknown, and a conscious rational reagent between a micro and macrocosm ineluctably constructed upon the incertitude of the void. Was this affirmation apprehended by Bloom? Not verbally, substantially. What comforted his misapprehension? That as a complete keyless citizen he had proceeded energetically from the unknown to the known through the incertitude of the void. In what order of precedence, with what attendant ceremony, was the exodus from the house of bondage to the wilderness of inhabitation effected? Lighted candle in stick borne by Bloom. Diaconal hat on ash plant borne by Stephen. With what intonation secreto of what commemorative psalm? the 113th, modus peregrinus, in exitu Israel de Egypto domus Jacobae populo barbaro. What did each do at the door of egress? Bloom set the candlestick on the floor, Stephen put the hat on his head. For what creature was the door of egress a door of ingress? For a cat. What spectacle confronted them when they, first the host, then the guest, emerged silently, double dark, from obscurity by a passage from the rear of the house into the penumbra of the garden? The heaven tree of stars hung with humid night-blue fruit. With what meditations did Bloom accompany his demonstration to his companion of various constellations? Meditations of evolution increasingly vaster, of the moon invisible in incipient lunation, approaching perigee, of the infinite lentiginous scintillating uncondensed Milky Way, discernible by daylight by an observer placed at the lower end of a cylindrical vertical shaft 500 feet deep, sunk from the surface towards the center of the earth, of Sirius Alpha in Canis Major, 10 light-years, 57 billion miles, distant and in a volume 900 times the dimension of our planet, of Arcturus, of the procession of equinoxes, of Orion with belt and sextuple theta and nebula in which 100 of our solar systems could be contained, of moribund and of nascent new stars such as Nova in 1901, of our system plunging towards the constellation of Hercules, of the parallax or parallactic drift of so-called fixed stars, in reality ever-moving wanderers from immeasurable remote eons to infinitely remote futures, in comparison with which the years 70 of allotted human life formed a parenthesis of infinitesimal brevity. Were there obverse meditations of involution increasingly less vast? Of the eons of geological periods recorded in the stratifications of the earth, of the myriad minute etymological organic existences concealed in cavities of the earth, beneath removable stones, in hives and mounds, of microbes, germs, bacteria, bacilli, spermatozoa, of the incalculable trillions of billions of millions of imperceptible molecules contained by cohesion of molecular affinity in a single pinhead, of the universe of human serum constellated with red and white bodies, themselves universes of void space constellated with other bodies, each in continuity, its universe of divisible component bodies of which each was again divisible in divisions of redivisible component bodies, divided and divisors ever diminishing without actual division till, if the progress were carried far enough, naught nowhere was ever reached. Why did he not elaborate these calculations to a more precise result? Because some years previously, in 1886, when occupied with the problem of the quadrature of the circle, he had learned of the existence of a number, computed to a relative degree of accuracy to be of such magnitude and of so many places, e.g. the 9th power of the 9th power of 9, that the result had been obtained. 33 closely printed volumes of 1,000 pages each of innumerable queries and reams of Indian paper would have to be requisitioned in order to contain the complete tale of its printed integers of units, tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions. The nucleus of the nebula of every digit of every series containing succinctly the potentiality of being raised to the utmost kinetic elaboration of any power of any of its powers. Did he find the problems of the inhabitability of the planets and their satellites by a race, given in species, and of the possible social and moral redemption of such race by a redeemer, easy of solution? Of a different order of difficulty. Did he find the problems of the inhabitability of the planets and their satellites by a race given in species, and of the possible social and moral redemption of such race by a redeemer, easy of solution? Of a different order of difficulty. Did he find the problems of the inhabitability of the planets and their satellites by a race given in species, and of the possible social and moral redemption of such race by a redeemer, easy of solution? Of a different order of difficulty. Did he find the problems of the inhabitability of the planets and their satellites by a race given in species, and of the possible social and moral redemption of such race by a redeemer, easy of solution? Of a different order of difficulty. Did he find the problems of the inhabitability of the planets and their satellites by a race given in species, and of the possible social and moral redemption of such race by a redeemer, easy of solution? Of a different order of difficulty. Did he find the problems of the inhabitability of the planets and their satellites by a race given in species, and of the possible social and moral redemption of such race by a redeemer, easy of solution? Of a different order of difficulty. Conscious that the human organism, normally capable of sustaining an atmospheric pressure of 19 tons, when elevated to a considerable altitude in the terrestrial atmosphere, suffered with arithmetical progression of intensity, according as the line of demarcation between troposphere and stratosphere was approximated from nasal hemorrhage, impeded respiration and vertigo when proposing this problem for solution, he had conjectured as a working hypothesis which could not be proved impossible that a more adaptable and differently anatomically constructed race of beings might subsist otherwise under Martian, Mercurial, Venereal, Jovian, Saturnian, Neptunian, or Uranian sufficient and equivalent conditions, though an apogean humanity of beings created in various forms with finite differences resulting similar to the whole and to one another, would probably there, as here, remain inalterably and inalienably attached to vanities of vanities, and to all that is vanity. And the problem of possible redemption? The minor was proved by the major. Which various features of the constellations were in turn considered? The various colors significant of varying degrees of vitality, white, yellow, crimson, vermilion, cinnabar. Their degrees of brilliancy, their magnitudes revealed up to and including the seventh, their positions, the Wagoner's Star, Walsingham Way, the Chariot of David, the annular cinctures of Saturn, the condensation of spiral nebula into the Sun, the interdependent gyrations of double suns, the independent synchronous discoveries of Galileo, Simon Marius, Piazzi, Leverrier, Herschel, Galilei, the systematizations attempted by Bode and Kepler of cubes of distances and squares of time of revolution, the almost infinite comprehensibility of hirsute comets and their vast elliptical egressive and reentrant orbits from perihelion to aphelion, the sidereal origin of meteoric stones, the Libyan floods on Mars about the period of the birth of the younger astroscopist, the annual reoccurrence of meteoric showers about the period of the feast of St. Lawrence, Martyr, Low August, the monthly reoccurrence known as the new moon with the old moon in her arms, the posited influence of celestial on human bodies, the appearance of a star first magnitude of exceeding brilliancy dominated by night and day, a new luminous sun generated by the collision and amalgamation in incandescence of two non-luminous X-suns, about the period of the birth of William Shakespeare over Delta in the recumbent never-setting constellation of Cassiopeia, and of a star, second magnitude, of similar origin but of lesser brilliancy, which had appeared in and disappeared from the constellation of the Corona Septentrionalis about the period of the birth of Leopold Bloom, and of other stars of presumably similar origin which had, effectively or presumably, appeared in and disappeared from the constellation of Andromeda about the period of the birth of Stephen Dedalus, and in and from the constellation of Auriga, some years after the birth and death of Rudolph Bloom, Jr., and in and from other constellations some years before or after the birth or death of other persons. The attendant phenomenon of eclipses, solar and lunar, from immersion to immersion, abated of wind, transit of shadow, taciturnity of winged creatures, emergent of nocturnal or crepuscular animals, persistence of infernal light, obscurity of terrestrial waters, pallor of human beings. His, Bloom's, logical conclusion, having weighed the matter and allowing for possible error, that it was not a heaven tree, not a heaven grot, not a heaven beast, not a heaven man, that it was a utopia, there being no known method for the known to the unknown, and infinitely renderable, equally finite by the supposititious apposition of one or more bodies equally of the same and of different magnitudes, a mobility of illusory forms immobilized in space, remobilized in air, a past which possibly had ceased to exist as a present before its probable spectators had entered actual present existence. Was he more convinced of the aesthetic value of the spectacle? Indubitably in consequence of the reiterated examples of poets in the delirium of the frenzy of attachment, or in the abasement of rejection, invoking ardent sympathetic constellations, or the frigidity of the satellite of their planet. Did he then accept as an article of belief the theory of astrological influences upon sublunary disasters? It seemed to him as possible of proof as a confutation, and the nomenclature employed in its selenographical chart as attributable to verifiable intuition as to fallacious analogy, the lake of dreams, the sea of rains, the gulf of dews, the ocean of fecundity. What special affinities appeared to him to exist between the moon and women? Her antiquity in preceding and surviving successive Tellurian generations, her nocturnal predominance, her satellitic dependence, her luminary reflection, her constancy under all her phases, rising and setting by her appointed times, waxing and waning, the forced invariability of her aspect, her indeterminate response to inaffirmative interrogation, her potency over effluent and refluent waters, her power to enamor, to mortify, to invest with beauty, to render insane, to incite to and aid delinquency, the tranquil inscrutability of her visage, the terribility of her isolated, dominant, implacable, resplendent propinquity, her omens of tempest and of calm, the stimulation of her light, her motion, and her presence, the admonition of her craters, her arid seas, her silence, her splendor when visible, her attraction when invisible. What visible luminous sign attracted Bloom's, who attracted Stephen's gaze? In the second story rear of his, Bloom's, house, the light of a paraffin oil lamp with oblique shade projected on a screen of roller blinds supplied by Frank O'Hara, window blind, curtain roll, and revolving shutter manufactured 16 on Gare Street. How did he elucidate the mystery of an invisible attractive person, his wife Marion Molly Bloom, denoted by a visible splendid sign, a lamp? With indirect or direct verbal allusions or affirmations, with subdued affection and admiration, with description, with impediment, with suggestion. Both then were silent, each contemplating the other in both mirrors of the reciprocal flesh of their his no his fellow faces. Were they indefinitely inactive? At Stephen's suggestion, at Bloom's instigation both, first Stephen then Bloom in penumbra urinated, their sides contagious, their organs of micturation reciprocally rendered invisible by manual circumposition, their gazes, first Bloom's, then Stephen's, elevated to the projected luminous and semi-luminous shadow. Similarly, the trajectories of their first sequent then simultaneous urinations were dissimilar, Bloom's longer, less eruent, in the incomplete form of the bifurcated penultimate alphabetical letter, who in his ultimate year at high school, 1880, had been capable of attaining the point of greatest altitude against the whole concurrent strength of the institution, 210 scholars. Stephen's higher, more sibilant, who in the ultimate hours of the previous day had augmented by diuretic consumption and insistent vesical pressure. What different problems presented themselves to each concerning the invisible collateral organ of the other. To Bloom, the problems of irritability, tumescence, rigidity, reactivity, dimension, sanitariness, pilosity. To Stephen, the problem of the sacerdotal integrity of Jesus circumcised, 1 January, holiday of obligation to hear Mass and abstain from unnecessary servile work, and the problem as to whether the divine prepuce, the carnal bridal ring of the Holy Roman Catholic Apostolic Church, conserved in Calcutta, were deserving of simple hypergamy or of the fourth degree of latria, according to the abscission of such divine excrescences as hair and toenails. What celestial sign was by both simultaneously observed? A star precipitated with great apparent velocity across the firmament from Vega in the Lyre, above the zenith, beyond the star group of the Tress of Berenice, towards the zodiacal sign of Leo. How did the centripetal remainder afford egress to the centrifugal departer? By inserting the barrel of an originated male key in the hole of an unstable female lock, obtaining a purchase on the bow of the key, and turning its wards from right to left, withdrawing a bolt from its staple, pulling inward spasmodically an obsolescent unhinged door, and revealing an aperture for free egress and free ingress. How did they take leave, one of the other, in separation? Standing perpendicular at the same door and on different sides of its base, the lines of their valedictory arms meeting at any point and forming any angle less than the sum of two right angles. What sound accompanied the union of their tangent, the disunion of their respectively centrifugal and centripetal hands? The sound of the peal of the hour of the night by the chime of the bells in the church of St. George. What echoes of that sound were by both and each heard? By Stephen. Liliata ruti landlium, turma circumdent, e ubilentium te virginium, chorus excipiat. By Bloom. Hey ho, hey ho, hey ho, hey ho. Where were the several members of the company with which Bloom that day, at the bidding of that peal, had travelled from Sandymount in the south to Glasnevin in the north? Martin Cunningham in bed, Jack Power in bed, Simon Dedalus in bed, Ned Lambert in bed, Tom Kiernan in bed, Joe Hines in bed, John Henry Menton
in bed. Bernard Corrigan, in bed. Patsy Dingham, in bed. Patty Dingham, in the grave. Alone, what did Bloom hear? The double reverberation of retreating feet in the heaven-born earth, the double vibration of a Jew's harp in the resonant lane. Alone, what did Bloom feel? The cold of intercellular space, thousands of degrees below freezing point, or the absolute zero of Fahrenheit, centigrade, or Réaumur, the incipient intimations of proximate dawn. Of what did bell chime and hand touch and footstep and lone chill remind him? Of companions now in various manners in different places defunct. Percy Apjohn, killed in action, Muddy River. Philip Gilligan, phthisis, Jervis Street Hospital. Matthew F. Kane, accidental drowning, Dublin Bay. Philip Moisel, Nemea, Haighesbury Street. Michael Hart, phthisis. Mater Misericordia Hospital. Patrick Dingham, apoplexy, Sandymount. What prospect of what phenomenon inclined him to remain? The dispiration of 3 final stars, the diffusion of daybreak, the apparition of a new solar disk. Had he ever been a spectator of those phenomenon? Once, in 1887, after a protracted performance of charades in the house of Luke Doyle, Kimmage, he had awaited with patience the apparition of the diurnal phenomenon, seated on a wall, his gaze turned in the direction of Mizrach, the east. He remembered the initial paraphenomenon. More active air, a matutinal distant cock, ecclesiastical clocks at various points, avine music, the isolated tread of an early wayfarer, the visible diffusion of the light of an invisible luminous body, the first golden limb of the resurgent sun, perceptible low on the horizon. Did he remain? With deep inspiration he returned. Retraversing the garden, re-entering the passage. With deep inspiration he returned, retraversing the garden, re-entering the passage, reclosing the door. With brief suspiration he resumed the candle, reascended the stairs, reapproached the door of the front room, hall floor, and re-entered. What suddenly arrested his ingress? The right temporal lobe of the hollow sphere of his cranium came into contact with a solid timber angle where, an infinitesimal but sensible fraction of a second later, a painful sensation was located in consequence of antecedent sensations transmitted and registered. Describe the alterations effected in the disposition of the articles of furniture. A sofa, upholstered in prune plush, had been translocated from opposite the door to the ingleside near the compacted furled Union Jack, an alteration which he had frequently intended to execute. The blue and white checkered inlaid majolica-topped table had been placed opposite the door in the place vacated by the prune plush sofa. The walnut sideboard, a projecting angle of which had momentarily arrested his ingress, had been moved from its position beside the door to a more advantageous but more perilous position in front of the door. 2 chairs had been moved from right and left to the ingleside to the position originally occupied by the blue and white checker inlaid majolica-topped table. Describe them. 1. A squat stuffed easy-chair with stout arms extended and back slanted to the rear, which, repelled in recoil, had then upturned an irregular fringe of a rectangular rug and now displayed on its amply upholstered seat a centralized diffusing and diminishing discoloration. The other. A slender splayfoot chair of glossy cane curves, placed directly opposite the former, its frame from top to seat and from seat to base being varnished dark brown, its seat being a bright circle of white plated rush. What significances attached to these two chairs? Significance of similitude, of posture, of symbolism, of circumstantial evidence, of testimonial supermanence. What occupied the position originally occupied by the sideboard? A vertical piano, Cadby, with exposed keyboard, its closed coffins supporting a pair of long yellow ladies' gloves and an emerald ashtray containing 4 consumed matches, a partly consumed cigarette and 2 discolored ends of cigarettes. Its music rest supporting the music in the key of G natural for voice and piano of Love's Old Sweet Song, words by G. Clifton Bingham, composed by J. L. Malloy, sung by Madame Antoinette Sterling. Open at the last page with the final indications ad libitum, forte, pedal, animato, sustained pedal, ritarando, close. With what sensations did Bloom contemplate in rotating these objects? With strain, elevating a candlestick, with pain, feeling on his right temple a contused tumescence, with attention, focusing his gaze on a large, dull, passive, and slender, bright active, with solicitation, bending and downturning the upturning rug fringe, with amusement, remembering Dr. Malachi Mulligan's scheme of colour containing the graduation of green, with pleasure, repeating the words and antecedent act and perceiving through various channels of internal sensibility the consequent and concomitant tepid, pleasant diffusion of gradual discoloration. His next proceeding? From an open box on the majolica-topped table, he extracted a black diminutive cone, 1 inch in height, placed it on its circular base in a small tin plate, placed his candlestick on the right corner of the mantelpiece, produced from his wainscoat a folded page of prospectus, illustrated, entitled Agendath Natum, unfolded the same, examined it superficially, rolled it into a thin cylinder, ignited it in the candle flame, applied it when ignited to the apex of the cone till the latter reached the stage of redolence, placed the cylinder in the basin of the candlestick, disposing its unconsumed part in such a manner as to facilitate total combustion. What followed this operation? The truncated conical crater summit of the diminutive volcano emitted a vertical and serpentine fume redolent of aromatic oriental incense. What homeothetic objects, other than the candlestick, stood on the mantelpiece? A timepiece of striated Connemara marble, stopped at the hour of 4:46 a.m. on the 21st March 1896, matrimonial gift of Matthew Dillon, a dwarf tree of glacial arborescence under a transparent bell-shade, matrimonial gift of Luke and Caroline Doyle, an embalmed owl, matrimonial gift of Alderman John Hooper. What interchanges of looks took place between these 3 objects and Bloom? In the mirror of the gilt-bordered pier-glass, the undecorated back of the dwarf tree regarded the upright back of the embalmed owl. Before the mirror, the matrimonial gift of Alderman John Hooper, with a clear, melancholy, wise, bright, motionless, compassionate gaze, regarded Bloom, while Bloom, with obscure, tranquil, profound, motionless, compassionate gaze, regarded the matrimonial gift of Luke and Caroline Doyle. What composite asymmetrical image in the mirror then attracted his attention? the image of a solitary, ipso-relative, mutable, aliorelative man. What solitary, ipso-relative? Brothers and sisters had he none, yet that man's father was his grandfather's son. Why mutable, aliorelative? From infancy to maturity he had resembled his maternal procreatrix. From maturity to senility he would increasingly resemble his paternal procreator. What final visual impression was communicated to him by the mirror? The optical reflection of several inverted volumes improperly arranged and not in the order of their common letters, with scintillating titles on the two bookshelves opposite. Catalogue these books. Tom's Dublin Post Office Directory, 1886. Dennis Florence McCarthy's Poetical Works, copper beechleaf bookmark at page 5. Shakespeare's work, dark crimson morocco, gold-tooled. The Useful Ready Reckoner, brown cloth. The Secret History of the Court of Charles II, red cloth, tooled binding. The Child's Guide, blue cloth. The Beauties of Killarney, wrappers. When We Were Boys, by William O'Brien, M.P. Greenish cloth, slightly faded, envelope bookmark at page 217. Thoughts from Spinoza, maroon leather. The Story of the Heavens, by Sir Robert Ball, blue cloth. Ellis's 3 Trips to Madagascar, brown cloth, title obliterated. The Stark Munro Letters, by A. Conan Doyle, property of the City of Dublin Public Library, 106 Capel Street, lent 21st May, Whitsun Eve, 1904, due 4 June 1904, 13 days overdue, black cloth binding bearing a white letter number ticket. Voyages in China, by Viator, recovered with brown paper, red ink title. Philosophy of the Talmud, sewn pamphlet. Lockhart's Life of Napoleon, cover wanting, marginal annotations, minimalizing victories, aggrandizing defeats of the propagandist. Soll und Haben, by Gustav Freytag. Blackboards, Gothic characters, cigarette coupon bookmark at page 24. Hosier's History of the Russo-Turkish War, brown cloth, A volumes, with gummed label. Garrison Library, Governor's Parade, Gibraltar, in verso of cover. Lawrence Bloomfield in Ireland, by William Allingham, 2nd edition, green cloth, gilt, trefold design, previous owner's name on recto of flyleaf erased. A Handbook of Astronomy, cover brown leather, detached S-plates, antique letterpress, long primer, author's footnotes nonpareil, marginal clues brevier, captions small pica. The Hidden Life of Christ, blackboards. In the Track of the Sun, yellow cloth, title page missing, recurrent title intestation. Physical Strength and How to Obtain It, by Eugene Sandow, red cloth. Short but yet plain elements of geometry, written in French by F. Ignat, parties and rendered into English by John Harris, D.D. London, printed for John Knaplock at the Bishop's Head, M.D. CCXI, with dedicatory epistle to his worthy friend Charles Cox, Esquire, Member of Parliament for the Burgh of Southwark, and having ink calligraphed statement in the flyleaf certifying that the book was the property of Michael Gallagher, dated this 10th day of May, 1822, and requesting the person who should find it, if the book should be lost or go astray, to return it to Michael Gallagher, Carpenter, Durfee Gate, Ennicorphy, County Wicklow, the finest place in the world. What reflections occupied his mind during the process of reversion of the inverted volumes? The necessity of order, a place for everything and everything in its place. The deficient appreciation of literature possessed by females, the incongruity of an apple incunated in a tumbler and of an umbrella inclined in a clothes-tool, the insecurity of hiding any secret document behind, beneath, or between the pages of a book. Which volume was the largest in bulk? Hozier's History of the Russo-Turkish War. What among other data did the second volume of the work in question contain? The name of a decisive battle, forgotten, frequently remembered by a decisive officer, Major Brian Cooper Tweedy, remembered. Why, firstly and secondly, did he not consult the work in question? Firstly, in order to exercise mnemotechnic. Secondly, because after an interval of amnesia, when seated at the central table, about to consult the work in question, he remembered by mnemotechnic the name of the military engagement, Plevna. What caused him consolation in this sitting posture? The candor, nudity, pose, tranquillity, youth, grace, sex, counsel of a statue erect in the centre of the table, an image of Narcissus purchased by auction from P. A. Wren, 9 Bachelor's Walk. What caused him irritation in this sitting posture? Inhibitory pressure of collar, size 17, and waistcoat 5 buttons, 2 articles of clothing superfluous in the costume of mature males and inelastic to alterations of mass by expansion. How was the irritation allayed? He removed his collar, with contained black necktie and collapsible stud, from his neck to a position on the left of the table. He unbuttoned successively in reversed direction waistcoat, trousers, shirt, and vest along the medial line of irregular, encruspated black hairs extended in triangular convergence from the pelvic basin over the circumference of the abdomen and umbilical fossicle, along the medial line of nodes to the intersection of the 6th pectoral vertebrae, thence produced both ways at right angles and terminating in circles described about 2 equidistant points, right and left, on the summits of the mammary prominences. He unbraced successively each of 6 minus 1 braced trouser buttons, arranged in pairs, of which 1 incomplete. What involuntary actions followed? He compressed between 2 fingers the flesh circumjacent to a cicatrice in the left infracostal region below the diaphragm, resulting from a sting inflicted 2 weeks and 3 days previously, 23rd May 1904, by a bee. He scratched imprecisely with his right hand, though insensible of prurition, various points and surfaces of his partly exposed, wholly abluted skin. He inserted his left hand into the left lower pocket of his waistcoat and extracted and replaced a silver coin, 1 shilling, placed there, presumably, on the occasion, 17 October 1903, of the internment of Mrs. Emily Sinico, Sydney Parade. Compiled the budget for 16 June 1904. Debit: 1 pork kidney, 3d. 1 copy Freeman's Journal, 1d. 1 bath and gratification, 1 shilling 6d. Tram fare, 1d. 1 memoriam Patrick Dingham, 5d. 2 Banbury cakes, 1d. 1 lunch, 7d. 1 renewal fee for book, 1 shilling. 1 packet notepaper and envelopes, 2d. 1 dinner gratification, 2 shillings. 1 postal order and stamp, 2 shillings 8 pence. Tram fare, 1 pence. 1 pig's foot, 4 pence. 1 sheep's trotter, 3 pence. 1 cake fries plain chocolate, 1 shilling. 1 square soda bread, 4 pence. 1 coffee and bun, 4 pence. Loan, Stephen Dedalus refunded, £1 7 shillings. Balance, 16 shillings 6 pence. Credit, cash on hand, 4 shillings 9 pence. Commission received, Freeman's Journal, £1 7 shillings 6 pence. Loan, Stephen Dedalus, £1 7 shillings. Totals, debit, £2 19 shillings 3 pence. Total credit, £2 19 shillings 3 pence. Did the process of divestiture continue? Sensible of a benignant, persistent ache in his foot-soles, he extended his foot to one side and observed the creases, protuberances, and salient points caused by foot pressure in the course of walking repeatedly in several different directions. Then inclined, he disnoted the lace knots, unhooked and loosened the laces, took off each of his 2 boots for the second time, detached the partially moistened right sock through the forepart which the nail of his great toe had again effaced, raised his right foot, and having unhooked a purple elastic sock suspender, took off his right sock, placed his unclothed right foot on the margin of the seat of his chair, picked at and greatly lacerated the protruding part of the great toenail, raised the part lacerated to his nostrils, and inhaled the odour of the quick. Then, with satisfaction, threw away the lacerated ungual fragment. Why with satisfaction? Because the odour inhaled corresponded with other odours inhaled of other ungual fragments picked and lacerated by Master Bloom, pupil of Mrs. Ellis's juvenile school, patiently each night in the act of brief genuflection and nocturnal prayer and ambitious meditation. In what ultimate ambition had all concurrent and consecutive ambitions now coalesced? Not to inherit by right of primogeniture, gravel-kind or borough English, or possess in perpetuity an excessive demesne of a sufficient number of acres, roods, and perches, statue land measure, valuation £42, of grazing tubery, surrounding a baronial hall with gate lodge and carriage drive, nor, on the other hand, a terrace house or semi-detached villa, described as rus en urbe or qui si sana, but to purchase by private treaty in fee simple a thatched, bungalow-shaped, 2-story dwelling house of southernly aspect, surmounted by vane and lightning conductor, connected with the earth, with porch covered by parasitic plant, ivy or Virginia creeper, hall door, olive green, with smart carriage finish and neat door brasses, stucco front with gilt tracery on eaves and gable, rising, if possible, upon a gentle eminence with agreeable prospect from balcony with a stone pillar parapet over unoccupied and unoccupiable interjacent pastures, and standing in 5 or 6 acres of its own ground, at such a distance from the nearest public thoroughfare as to render its house-lights visible at night above and through a quick-set hornbeam hedge of topiary cutting, situated at a given point not less than 1 statute miles from the periphery of the metropolis, within a time limit of not more than 15 minutes from tram or train line, e.g. Dundrum South or Sutton North. Both localities equally reported by trial to resemble the terrestrial poles in being favourable climates for physical subjects. The premises to be held under fee-farm grant, lease 999 years, the message to consist of 1 drawing-room with bay window, 2 lancets, thermometer affixed,
1 sitting room, 4 bedrooms, 2 servants' rooms, tiled kitchen with close range and scullery, lounge hall filled with linen wall presses, fumed oak sectional bookcase containing the Encyclopaedia Britannica and the New Century Dictionary, transverse obsolete medieval and oriental weapons, dinner gong, alabaster lamp, bowl pendant, vulcanite automatic telephone receiver with adjacent directory, hand-tufted Axminster carpet with cream ground and trellis border, loo table with pillar and claw legs, hearth with massive fire brasses, and ormolu mantel chronometer clock, guaranteed timekeeper with cathedral chime, barometer with hygrographic chart, comfortable lounge settees and corner fitments, upholstered in ruby plush with good springing and sunk center, 3-banner Japanese screen and cuspidors, club style, rich wine-colored leather, gloss renewable with a minimum of labor by use of linseed oil and vinegar, a pyramidical prismatic central chandelier luster, bentwood perch with finger-tame parrot, expurgated language, embossed mural paper at 10 shillings per dozen with transverse swags of carmine floral design and top crown fringe. Staircase. 3 continuous flights at successive right angles of varnished clear-grained oak. Treads and risers, newel, balusters and handrail with step-up panel dado dressed with camphorated wax. Bathroom, hot and cold supply. Reclining and shower. Water closet at mezzanine provided with opaque single-panel oblong window. Tin-up seat. Bracket lamp, brass tier rod and brace. Armrests, footstool and artistic oleograph in inner face of door. Ditto, plain. Servants' apartments with separate sanitary and hygienic necessities for cook, general and between maid, salary rising by biennial unearned increments of £2, with comprehensive fidelity insurance, annual bonus £1, and retiring allowance based on the 65 system, after 30 years' service. Pantry, buttery, larder, refrigerator, out-to offices, coal and wood cellarage with wine bin, still and sparkling vintages, for distinguished guests, if entertained to dinner, evening dress, carbon monoxide gas supply throughout. What additional attractions might the grounds contain? As addenda, a tennis and fives court, a shrubbery, a glass summer-house with tropical plants, equipped in the best botanical manner, a rockery with water spray, a beehive arranged on humane principles, oval flower beds in rectangular grass plots set with eccentric ellipses of scarlet and chrome tulips, blue scillas, crocuses, polyanthus, sweet william, sweet pea, lily of the valley, bulbs obtained from Sir James W. Mackey Limited, wholesale and retail seed and bulb merchants and nurserymen, agents for chemical manures, 23 Sackville Street, Upper. An orchard, kitchen garden, and vinery protected against illegal trespassers by glass-topped mural enclosures, a lumber shed with padlocks for various inventoried implements. As eel traps, lobster pots, fishing rods, hatchet, steel yard, grindstone, clod crusher, swathe turner, carriage sack, telescope ladder, 10-tooth rake, washing clogs, hay tender, tumbling rake, billhook, paint pot, brush, hoe, and so on. What improvements might be subsequently introduced? A rabbitry, fowl run, a dovecote, a botanical conservatory, 2 hammocks, ladies' and gentlemen's, a sundial shaded and sheltered by laburnum or lilac tree, an exotically harmonically accorded Japanese tinkle gate bell affixed to left lateral gatepost, a capricious water butt, a lawn mower with side delivery and grass box, a lawn sprinkler with hydraulic hose. What facilities of transit were desirable? When city-bound, frequent connection by train or tram from their respective intermediate station or terminal. When country-bound, velocipedes, a chainless freewheel roadster cycle with side basket car attached, or draft convenience, a donkey with wicker trap, or smart phaeton with good-working solid ungular cob, roan gelding, 14H. What might be the name of this erigible or erected residence? Bloom Cottage, St. Leopold's, Flowerville. Could Bloom of 7 Eccles Street foresee Bloom of Flowerville? In loose all-wood garments with Harris tweed cap, price 8 shillings 6pence, and useful garden boots with elastic gussets and watering can, planting aligned young fir trees, syringing, pruning, staking, sowing hayseed, trundling a weed-laden wheelbarrow with excessive fatigue at sunset amid the scent of new-mown hay, ameliorating the soil, multiplying wisdom, achieving longevity. What syllabus of intellectual pursuits was simultaneously possible? Snapshot photography, comparative study of religion, folklore relative to various amatory and superstitious practices, contemplation of the celestial constellations. What lighter recreations? Outdoor, garden and fieldwork, cycling on level macadamized causeways, ascents of moderately high hills, natation in secluded fresh water, and unmolested river-boating in secure wherry or lycurical with kedge anchor, on reaches free from weirs and rapids, period of estivation. Vespertinal perambulation or equestrian circumprocession with inspection of sterile landscape and contrastingly agreeable cottagers' fires of smoking peat turves, period of hibernation. Indoor. Discussion in tepid security of unsolved historical and criminal problems. Lecture of unexpurgated exotic erotic masterpieces. House carpentry with toolbox containing hammer, awl nails, screws, tin tacks, gimlet, tweezers, bullnose plane, and turnscrew. Might he have become a gentleman farmer of field produce and livestock? Not impossibly, with 1 or 2 stripper cows, 1 pike of upland hay, and requisite farming implements, e.g., an end-to-end churn, a turnip pulper, etc. What would be his civic functions and social status among the country families and landed gentry? Arranged successively in ascending powers of hierarchical order, that of gardener, groundsman, cultivator, breeder, and at the zenith of his career, resident magistrate or justice of the peace, with a family crest and a coat of arms and appropriate classical motto, Semper Paratus. Duly recorded in the court directory, Bloom, Leopold P. MP, PC, KP, LLD, honoris causis, Bloomville, Dundrum, and mentioned in court and fashionable intelligence, Mr. and Mrs. Leopold Bloom have left Kingstown for England. What course of action did he outline for himself in such capacity? A course that lay between undue clemency and excessive rigor, the dispensation in a heterogeneous society of arbitrary class incessantly rearranged in terms of greater and lesser social inequality, of unbiased, homogeneous, indisputable justice, tempered with mitigants of the wildest possible latitude, but extractable to the uttermost farthing with confiscation of estate, real and personal, to the crown, loyal to the highest constituted power of the land,
actuated by an innate love of the rectitude his aims would be the strictest maintenance of public order, the repression of many abuses, though not of all simultaneously, every measure of reform or retrenchment being a preliminary solution to be contained by fluxion in the final solution. The upholding of the letter of the law, common statute and law merchant, against all traversers in covine and trespassers acting in contravention of bylaws and regulations, all resuscitators by trespass and petty larceny of kindlings, of venval rights, obsolete by desuetude, all orotund instigators of international persecution, all perpetuators of international animosities, all menial molesters of domestic conviviality, all recalcitrant violators of domestic connubiality. Prove that he had loved rectitude from his earliest youth. To Master Percy Apjohn at high school in 1880, he had divulged his disbelief in the tenets of the Irish Protestant Church, to which his father Rudolf Verag, later Rudolf Bloom, had been converted from the Israelic faith and communion in 1865 by the Society for Promoting Christianity Among the Jews, subsequently abjured by him in favor of Roman Catholicism at the epoch of, and with a view to, his matrimony in 1888. To Daniel Magrain and Francis Wade in 1882, during a juvenile friendship terminated by the premature emigration of the former, he had advocated during nocturnal preambulations the political theory of colonial, e.g. Canada, expansion, and the evolutionary theories of Charles Darwin, expounded in The Descent of Man and the Origin of Species. In 1885 he had publicly expressed his adherence to the collective and national economic program advocated by James Fenton Lalor, John Fisher Murray, John Mitchell, J. F. X. O'Brien, and others, the agrarian policy of Michael Davitt, the constitutional agitation of Charles Stewart Parnell, MP for Cork City, the program of peace, retrenchment, and reform of William Ewart Gladstone, MP for Midlothian, N.B., and in support of his political convictions had climbed up to a secure position amid the ramifications of a tree in Northumberland Road to see the entrance, 2nd of February 1888, into the capital of a demonstrative torchlight procession of 20,000 torch-bearers divided into 120 trade corporations bearing 2,000 torches in escort of the Marquess of Ripon and honest John Morley. How much and how did he propose to pay for his country residence? As per prospectus of the industrious foreign acclimatized nationalized friendly state aid building society, incorporated 1874, a maximum of £60 per annum, being 1/6 of an assured income derived from gilt-edged securities, representing 5% simple interest or capital of £1,200, estimate of price at 20 years' purchase, of which to be paid on acquisition and the balance in the form of annual rent, viz. £800 plus 2.5% interest on the same, repayable quarterly in equal annual installments until extinction by amortization of loan advanced for purchase within a period of 20 years, amounting to an annual rental of £64, head rent included. The title deeds to remain in possession of the lender or lenders, with a savings clause envisaging forced sale, foreclosure, and mutual compensation in the event of protracted failure to pay the terms assigned. Otherwise, the message to become the absolute property of the tenant-occupier upon expiry of the period of years stipulated. What rapid but insecure means to opulence might facilitate immediate purchase? A private wireless telegraph which would transmit by dot and dash system the result of a national equine handicap, flat or steeplechase, of 1 or more miles and furlongs won by an outsider at odds of 50-1 at 3 hours 8 minutes p.m. at Ascot, Greenwich time, the message being received and available for betting purposes in Dublin at 2:59 p.m. Dunsink time. An unexpected discovery of an object of great monetary value, precious stone, valuable adhesive, or impressed postage stamp. 7-shilling mauve imperforated Hamburg 1866, 4d. Rose, blue paper, perforate, Great Britain 1855. 1 franc, stone, official, roulated diagonal surcharge, Luxembourg 1878. Antique dynastic ring, unique relic. In unusual repositories or by unusual means. From the air, dropped by an eagle in flight. By fire, amid the carbonized remains of an incendiated edifice. In the sea, amid flotsam, jetsam, ligan, and derelict. On earth, in the gizzard of a comestible fowl. A Spanish prisoner's donation of a distant treasure of valuables or specie or bullion lodged with a solvent banking corporation 100 years previously at 5% compound interest of the collective worth of £5 million sterling. A contract with an inconsiderable contractee for the delivery of 32 consignments of some given commodity, in consideration of cash payment on delivery per delivery at the initial rate of a farthing, to be increased constantly in the geometrical progression of 2. Farthing, halfpenny, 1 penny, 3d., 4d., 8d., 1 shilling 4d., 2 shillings 8d., to 32 terms. A prepared scheme based on a study of the laws of probability to break the Bank of Monte Carlo, a solution of the secular problem of the quadrants of the circle, government premium £1 million sterling. What vast wealth acquirable through industrial channels? The reclamation of dunams of waste aerial soil, proposed in the prospectus by Agenath Natham, Bleibtreustrasse, Berlin, West 15, by the cultivation of orange plantations and melon fields and reforestation, the utilization of waste paper, fells of sewer rodents, animal excrement possessing chemical properties, in view of the vast production of the first, vast number of the second, and immense quantity of the third. Every normal human being of average vitality and appetite producing annually, cancelling by products of water, a sum total of 80 pounds, mixed animal and vegetable diet, to be multiplied by 4,386,035, the total population of Ireland, according to the census returns of 1901. Were these schemes of wider scope? A scheme to be formulated and submitted for approval to the harbour commissioners for the exploitation of white coal, hydraulic power, obtained by hydroelectric plant at peak of tide at Dublin Bar or at head of water at Pulafoca or Powers Court or Catamite basins of main streams for the economic production of 50,000 WHP of electricity. A scheme to enclose the peninsula delta of the North Bull at Dollymount, and erect on the space of the foreland used for golf links and rifle ranges an asphalted esplanade with casinos, booths, shooting galleries, hotels, boarding houses, reading rooms, establishments for mixed bathing. A scheme for the use of dog vans and goat vans for the delivery of early morning milk. A scheme for the development of Irish tourist traffic in and around Dublin by means of petro-propelled riverboats, plying in the fluvial fairway between steamers for coastwise navigation, 10 shillings per person per day, guide trilingual included. A scheme for the repristination of passenger and goods traffics over Irish waterways when freed from weedbeds. A scheme to connect by tramline the Cattle Market, North Circular Road and Prussia Street, with the quays, Sheriff Street Lower and East Wall, parallel with the Lynx Line Railway laid in conjunction with the Great Southern and Western Railway Line, between the Cattle Park, Liffey Junction and terminus of the Midland Great Western Railway 43 to 45 North Wall, in proximity to the terminal stations at Dublin branches of Great Central Railway, Midland Railway of England, City of Dublin Steam Packet Company, Lancaster and Northshire Railway Company, Dublin and Glasgow Steam Packet Company, Glasgow and Dublin and Londonderry Steam Packet Company, Laird Line, British and Irish Steam Packet Company, Dublin and Moorcabe Steamers, London and North West Railway Company, Dublin Port and Dockets Board Landing Sheds and Transit Sheds of Palgrave, Murphy and Company steamship owners, agents for steamers from Mediterranean, Spain, Portugal, France, Belgium and Holland, and for Liverpool Underwriters Association, the cost of acquiring rolling stock for animal transport and of additional mileage operated by the Dublin United Tramway Corporation Limited, to be covered by grazier's fees. Positing what protasis would the contraction for such several schemes become a natural and necessary apodosis? Given a guarantee equal to the sum sought, the support by deed or gift, transfer vouchers during donor's lifetime or by bequest after donor's painless extinction, of eminent financiers, Bloom Pasha, Rothschild Guggenheim, Hirsch, Montefiore, Morgan, Rockefeller, possessing fortunes of 6 figures, amassed during a successful life, and joining capital with opportunity, the thing required was done. What eventually would render him independent of such wealth? The independent discovery of a gold seam of inexhaustible ore. For what reason did he meditate on schemes so difficult of realization? It was one of his axioms that similar meditations or the automatic relation to himself of a narrative concerning himself or tranquil recollection of the past, when practiced habitually before retiring for the night, alleviated fatigue and produced as a result sound response and renovated vitality. His justifications? As a physicist, he had learned that of the 70 years of complete human life, at least 2/7, viz., 20 years, are passed in sleep. As a philosopher, he knew that at the termination of any allotted life, only an infinitesimal part of any person's desires had been realized. As a physiologist, he believed in the artificial placation of malignant agencies, chiefly operative during somnolence. What did he fear? The committal of homicide or suicide during sleep by an aberration of the light of reason, the incommensurable categorical intelligence situated in the cerebral convolutions. What were habitually his final meditations? Of some one sole unique advertisement to cause passengers to stop in wonder, a poster novelty, with all extraneous accretions excluded, reduced to its simplest and most efficient terms, not exceeding the span of casual vision and congruous with the velocity of modern life.
What did the first drawer unlocked contain? A Vere Foster's handwriting copybook, property of Millie Millicent Bloom, certain pages of which bore diagram drawings marked papli, which showed a large globular head with 5 hairs erect, 2 eyes in profile, the trunk full front with 3 large buttons, 1 triangular foot. 2 fading photographs of Queen Alexandra of Egypt and of Maud Branscombe, actress and professional beauty. A Yuletide card, bearing on it a pictorial representation of a parasitic plant, the legend Mizpah, the date Xmas 1892, the name of the senders. From Mr. and Mrs. M. Comerford, the versicle. May this Yuletide bring to thee joy and peace and welcome glee. A butt of red, partly liquefied sealing wax, obtained from the stores department of Messrs. Healy's Limited, 89, 90, and 91 Dame Street. A box containing the remainder of a gross of gilt J pen nibs, obtained from the same department of same firm. An old sand glass which rolled, containing sand which rolled. A sealed prophecy, never unsealed, written by Leopold Bloom in 1886, concerning the consequences of the passing into law of William Ewart Gladstone's Home Rule Bill of 1886, never passed into law. A bazaar ticket, number 2004, of S. Kevin's Charity Fair, price 6d, 100 prizes. An infantile epistle, dated small m Monday, reading capital P Popley, comma, capital H, how are you, note of interrogation, capital I am very well, full stop, new paragraph, signature with flourishes, capital M Millie, no stop. A cameo brooch, property of Ellen Bloom, born Higgins, deceased. A cameo scarf pin, property of Rudolph Bloom, born Virag, deceased. 3 typewritten letters, addressee Henry Flower, care of P.O. Westland Row, addresser Martha Clifford, care of P.O. Dolphin's Barn. The transliterated name and address of the addresser of the 3 letters in reversed alphabetic boustrophodonic punctated quadrilinear cryptogram, vowel suppressed. NIGS/WIUUOX/W/OKS/MH/YIM. A press cutting from an English weekly periodical, Modern Society, subject corporal chastisement in girls' schools. A pink ribbon which had festooned an Easter egg in the year 1899. 2 partly uncoiled rubber preservatives with reserve pockets, purchased by post from Box 32, Post Office, Charing Cross, London, W.C. 1 pack of 1 dozen cream-laid envelopes and faint-ruled note-paper, watermarked, now reduced by 3. Some assorted Austrian-Hungarian coins. 2 coupons of the Royal and Privileged Hungarian Lottery. A low-power magnifying glass. 2 erotic photocards showing A. Buccal coition between nude senorita, rear presentation, superior position, and nude torero, fore presentation, inferior position. B. Anal violation by male religious, fully clothed, eyes abject, of female religious, partly clothed, eyes direct. Purchased by post from Box 32, P.O., Charing Cross, London, W.C. A press cutting of recipe for renovation of old tan boots. A 1d adhesive stamp, lavender, of the reign of Queen Victoria. A chart of the measurements of Leopold Bloom compiled before, during, and after 2 months' consecutive use of Sandal Whitey's pulley exerciser, men's 15 shillings, athletes 20 shillings, viz. Chest 28 inches and 29.5 inches, biceps 9 inches and 10 inches, forearm 8.5 inches and 9 inches, thigh 10 inches and 12 inches, calf 11 inches and 12 inches. 1 prospectus of the Wonder Worker, the world's greatest remedy for rectal complaints, direct from Wonder Worker, Coventry House, South Place, London, E.C., addressed, erroneously, to Mrs. L. Bloom, with brief accompanying note commencing, erroneously, Dear Madam. Quote the textual terms in which the prospectus claimed advantages for this thaumaturgic remedy. It heals and soothes while you sleep. In case of trouble in breaking wind, assists nature in the most formidable way, ensuring instant relief in discharge of gases, keeping parts clean and free natural action, an initial outlay of 7 shillings 6d, making a new man of you and life worth living. Ladies find Wonder Worker especially useful, a pleasant surprise when they note delightful result like a cool drink of fresh spring water on a sultry summer's day. Recommend it to your lady and gentlemen friends. Lasts a lifetime. Insert long round end. Wonderworker. Were there testimonials? Numerous. From clergyman, British naval officer, well-known author, city man, hospital nurse, lady, mother of 5, absent-minded beggar. How did absent-minded beggar's concluding testimonial conclude? What a pity the government did not supply our men with wonder workers during the South African campaign. What a relief it would have been. What object did Bloom add to this collection of objects? A 4th typewritten letter received by Henry Flower, let HFBLB, from Martha Clifford, find MC. What pleasant reflection accompanied this action? The reflection that, apart from the letter in question, his magnetic face, form, and address had been favorably received during the course of the preceding day by a wife, Mrs. Josephine Breen, born Josie Powell, a nurse, Miss Callan, Christian name unknown, a maid, Gertrude, Gertie, family name unknown. What possibility suggested itself? The possibility of exercising virile power of fascination in the not immediate future after an expansive repast in a private apartment in the company of an elegant courtesan, of corporal beauty, moderately mercenary, variously instructed, a lady by origin.
What did the second drawer contain? Documents. The birth certificate of Leopold Paula Bloom. An endowment assurance policy of £500 in the Scottish Widows' Assurance Society. Intestated Millicent Millie Bloom, coming into force at 25 years as with profit policy of £430, £462, 10 shillings, and £500 at 60 years or death. 65 years or death and death, respectively, or with profit policy paid up of £299, 10 shillings, together with cash payment of £133, 10 shillings, at option. A bank passbook issued by the Ulster Bank, College Green branch, showing the statement of AC for half-year ending 31 December 1903, balance in depositor's favour, £18, 14 shillings, 6 sterling. Net personality. Certificate of possession of £900. Canadian 4% inscribed government stock, free of stamp duty. Dockets of the Catholic Cemeteries Glasnevin Committee, relative to a grave plot purchased. A local press cutting concerning change of name by deed poll. Quote the textual terms of this notice. I, Rudolph Verrig, now resident at No. 52 Clansbrassel Street, Dublin, formerly of Szombathely in the Kingdom of Hungary, hereby give notice that I have assumed and intend henceforth upon all occasions and at all times to be known by the name of Rudolph Bloom. What other objects relative to Rudolph Bloom, born Virag, were in the second drawer? An indistinct daguerreotype of Rudolph Virag and his father Leopold Virag, executed in the year 1852 in the portrait atelier of their, respectively, first and second cousin Stefan Virag of Szesfehérvár, Hungary. An ancient Haggadah book in which a pair of horn-rimmed convex spectacles inserted mark the passage of Thanksgiving in the ritual prayers for Pesach, Passover. A photocard of the Queen's Hotel, Ennis, proprietor Rudolph Bloom. An envelope addressed to my dear son Leopold. What fractions of phrases did the lecture of those 5 whole words invoke? Tomorrow will be a week that I received. It is no use, Leopold, to be with your dear mother. That is not more to stand. To her, all from me is out. Be kind to Athos, Leopold. My dear son, always, of me. Das hers, Gott, dein. What reminiscences of a human subject suffering from progressive melancholia did these objects evoke in Bloom? An old man, widower, unkempt of hair, in bed, with head covered, sighing. An infirm dog, Athos. Aconite, resorted to by increasing doses of grains and scruples, as a palliative of recrudescent neuralgia, the faith and death of a septuagenarian, suicide by poison. Why did Bloom experience a sentiment of remorse? Because in immature impatience he had treated with disrespect certain beliefs and practices. As the prohibition of the use of flesh meat and milk in one meal, the hebdomadary symposium of incoordinately abstract, pervertedly concrete mercantile co-ex-religionist ex-compatriots, the circumstances of male infants, the supernatural character of Judaic scripture, the ineffability of the Tetragrammaton, the sanctity of the Sabbath. How did these beliefs and practices now appear to him? None more rational than they had then appeared, not less rational than other beliefs and practices now appeared. What first reminiscence had he of Rudolph Bloom, deceased? Rudolph Bloom, deceased, narrated to his son Leopold Bloom, aged 6, a retrospective arrangement of migrations and settlements in and between Dublin, London, Florence, Milan, Vienna, Budapest, Szombathely, with statements of satisfaction, his grandfather having seen Maria Theresa, Empress of Austria, Queen of Hungary. With commercial advice, having taken care of pence, the pounds have taken care of themselves. Leopold Bloom, aged 6, had accompanied these narrations by constant consultation of a geographical map of Europe, political, and by suggestions for the establishment of affiliated business premises in the various centers mentioned. Had time equally but differently obliterated the memory of these migrations in narrator and listener? In narrator, by the excess of years and in consequence of the use of narcotic toxin, in listener by the access of years in consequence of the action of distraction upon vicarious experiences. What idiosyncrasies of the narrator were concomitant products of amnesia? Occasionally he ate without having previously removed his hat. Occasionally he drank voraciously the juice of gooseberry fool from an inclined plate. Occasionally he removed from his lips the traces of food by means of lacerated envelope or other accessible fragment of paper. What two phenomenon of sentience were more frequent? The myopic digital calculation of coins, eructation consequent upon repletion. What object offered partial consolidation for these reminiscences? The endowment policy, the bank passport, the certificate of the possession of scrip. Reduce Bloom by cross-multiplication of reverses of fortune, from which these supports protected him, and by elimination of all positive values to a negligible negative irrational unreal quantity, successively in descending helotic order. Poverty, that of the outdoor hawker of imitation jewelry, the dun for the recovery of bad and doubtful debts, the poor rate and deputy cess collector. Mendicancy, that of the fraudulent bankrupt and with negligible assets paying 1 shilling 4 in the pound, sandwich man, distributor of throwaways, nocturnal vagrant, insinuating sycophant, maimed sailor, blind stripling, superannuated bailiff's man, mar feast, lick plate, spoil sport, pick thank, eccentric public laughingstock seated on bench of public park under discarded perforated umbrella, destitution. The inmate of Old Man's House, Royal Hospital, Kilmainham. The inmate of Simpson's Hospital for reduced but respectable men, permanently disabled by gout or want of sight. Nadir of misery. The aged, impotent, disenfranchised, rate-supported moribund, lunatic pauper. With which attendant indignities. The unsympathetic indifference of previously amiable females, the contempt of muscular males, the acceptance of fragments of bread, the simulated ignorance of casual acquaintances, the latration of illegitimate unlicensed vagabond dogs, the infantile discharge of decomposed vegetable missiles, worth little or nothing, nothing or less than nothing. By what could such a situation be precluded? By decease, change of state. By departure, change of place. Which, preferably? The latter, by the line of least resistance. What considerations render departure not entirely undesirable? Constant cohabitation, impending mutual toleration of personal defects, the habit of independent purchase increasingly cultivated, the necessity to counteract by impermanent sojourn the permanence of arrest. What considerations rendered departure not rational? The parties concerned, uniting, had increased and multiplied, which being done, offspring produced and educed to maturity, the parties, if not disunited, were obliged to reunite for increase and multiplication, which was absurd, to form by reunion the original couple of uniting parties, which was impossible. What considerations rendered departure desirable? The attractive character of certain localities in Ireland and abroad, as represented in general geographic maps of polychrome design, or in special ordnance survey charts by employment of scale numerals and hatchers. In Ireland, the cliffs of Moher, the windy wilds of Connemara, Lough Neagh with submerged petrified city, the Giant's Causeway, Fort Camden and Fort Carlisle, the Golden Vale of Tipperary, the islands of Arran, the pastures of Royal Meath, Bridget's Elm in Kildare, the Queen's Island shipyard in Belfast, the Salmon Leap, the lakes of Killarney. Abroad, Ceylon, with spice gardens supplying tea to Thomas Kiernan, agent for Pulbrook, Robertson and Company, 2 Mincing Lane, London, E.C., 5 Dame Street, Dublin. Jerusalem, the Holy City, with Mosque of Omar and Gate of Damascus, goal of aspiration. The Straits of Gibraltar, the unique birthplace of Marion Tweedy. The Parthenon, containing statues of nude Grecian divinities. The Wall Street Money Market, which controlled international finance. The Plaza de Toros at La Linea, Spain, where O'Hara of the Camerons had slain the bull. Niagara, over which no human being had passed with impunity. The land of the Eskimos, eaters of soap. The forbidden country of Tibet, from which no traveller returns. The Bay of Naples, to see which was to die. The Dead Sea. Under what guidance, following what signs? At sea, septentrional, by night the pole star, located at the point of intersection of the right line from beta to alpha in Ursa Major, produced and divided externally at omega, and the hypotenuse of the right-angled triangle formed by the line alpha omega, so produced, and the line alpha delta of Ursa Major. On land, meridional, a bispherical moon, revealed in imperfect varying phases of lunation through the posterior interstice of the imperfectly occluded skirt of a Carnot's negligent perambulating female, a pillar of the cloud by day. What public advertisement would divulge the occultation of the departed? £5 reward, lost, stolen or strayed from his residence, 7 Eccles Street, missing gent about 40, answering to the name of Bloom, Leopold, Poldy, height 5 feet 9 1/2 inches, full build, olive complexion, may have since grown a beard, when last seen was wearing a black suit. Above sum will be paid for information leading to his discovery. What universal binomial denominations would be his as entity and non-entity? Assumed by any or known to none. Every man or no man. What tributes his? Honor and gifts of strangers, the friends of every man. A nymph immortal beauty, the bride of no man. Would the departed never, nowhere, nohow reappear? Ever would he wander, self-compelled, to the extreme limit of his cometary orbit, beyond the fixed stars and variable suns and telescopic planets, astronomical waifs and strays, to the extreme boundary of space, passing from land to land among peoples amid events. Somewhere imperceptible he would hear and somehow reluctantly, sun-compelled, obey the summons of recall, whence, disappearing from the constellation of the Northern Crown, he would somehow reappear reborn above Delta in the constellation of Cassiopeia, after incalculable eons of peregrination, return an estranged avenger, a wrecker of justice on malefactors, a dark crusader, a sleeper awakened, with financial resources, by supposition, surpassing those of Rothschild or the Silver King. What would render such return irrational? An unsatisfactory equation between an exodus and return in time through reversible space and an exodus and return in space through irreversible time. What play of forces induced inertia, rendered departure undesirable? The lateness of the hour rendering procrastinatory, the obscurity of the night rendering invisible, the uncertainty of thoroughfares rendering perilous, the necessity for repose obviating movement, the proximity of an occupied bed obviating research, the anticipation of warmth human, tempered with coolness linen, obviating desire and rendering desirable, the state of Narcissus, sound without echo, desired desire. What advantages were possessed by an occupied as distinct from an unoccupied bed? The removal of nocturnal solitude, the superior quality of human, mature female, to inhuman, hot water jar, calification, the stimulation of matutinal contact, the economy of mangling done on the premises in the case of trousers accurately folded and placed lengthwise between the spring mattress, striped, and the woolen mattress, biscuit section. What past consecutive causes, before rising pre-apprehended, of accumulated fatigue did Bloom, before rising, silently recapitulate? The preparation of breakfast, burnt offering, intestinal congestion and premeditative defecation, holy of holies, the bath, rite of John, the funeral, rite of Samuel, the advertisement of Alexander Keyes, Urim and Thummim, the unsubstantial lunch, the rite of Melchizedek, the visit to museum and natural library, holy place, the book hunt along Bedford Row, Merchant's Arch, Wellington Quay, Simach Torah, the music in the Ormond Hotel, Shira Shirim, the altercation with a truculent troglodyte in Bernard Kiernan's premises, Holocaust, a blank period of time including a car drive, a visit to a house of mourning, a leave-taking wilderness, the eroticism produced by feminine exhibitionism, Rite of Onan, the prolonged delivery of Mrs. Minor Purefoy, Heave Offering, the visit to the disorderly house of Mrs. Bella Cohen, 82 Tyrone Street Lower, and subsequent brawl and chance medley in Beaver Street, Armageddon, nocturnal preambulation to and from the cabman's shelter Buttbridge, Atonement. What self-imposed enigma did Bloom about to rise in order to go so as to conclude, lest he should not conclude, involuntarily apprehend? The cause of a brief, sharp, unforeseen, heard, loud, lone crack, emitted by the insentient material of a strain-veined timber table. What self-involved enigma did Bloom risen, going, gathering multiform, multitudinous garments, voluntarily apprehending, not comprehend? Who is Mackintosh? What self-evident enigma pondered with desultory constancy during 30 years did Bloom now, having effected natural obscurity by the extinction of artificial light, silently, suddenly comprehend? Where was Moses when the candle went out? What imperfections in a perfect day did Bloom, walking, charged with collecting articles of recent divested male wearing apparel, silently, successively enumerate? A provisional failure to obtain renewal of an advertisement, to obtain a certain quantity of tea from Thomas Kiernan, agent for Pulbrook, Robertson and Company, 5 Dame Street, Dublin, and 2 Mincing Lane, London, E.C. To certify the presence or absence of posterior rectal orifice in the case of Hellenic female divinities. To obtain admission, gratuitous or paid, to the performance of Leah by Bandmaster Palmer at the Gaiety Theatre, 46, 47, 48, 49, South King Street. What impression of an absent face did Bloom, arrested, silently recall? The face of her father, the late Major Brian Cooper Tweedy, Royal Dublin Fusiliers, of Gibraltar and Rehoboth, Dolphin's Barn. What recurrent impressions of the same were possible by hypotheses? Retreating at the terminus of the Great Northern Railway, Ammon Street, with constant uniform acceleration, along parallel lines reproduced from infinity, with constant uniform retardation at the terminus of the Great Northern Railway, Ammon Street, returning. What miscellaneous effects of female personal wearing apparel were perceived by him? A pair of new inodorous half-silk black ladies' hose, a pair of new violet garters, a pair of outsized ladies' drawers of India mull, cut on generous lines, redolent of Apopanax, jessamine, and Marathi's Turkish cigarettes, and containing a long brief steel safety pin, folded curvilinear, a camisole of batiste with thin lace border, an accordion underskirt of blue silk moirette, all these objects being disposed irregularly on the top of a rectangular trunk, quadruple battened, having capped corners with multicolored labels, initially on its foreside in white lettering, B.C.T., Brian Cooper Tweedy. What impersonal objects were perceived? A commode, one leg fractured, totally covered by square cretonne cutting, apple design, in which rested lady's black straw hat, orange keyedware, brought of Henry Price, basket, fancy goods, chinaware and ironmongery manufacture, disposed irregularly on the washstand and floor and consisting of basin, soap dish, and brush tray on the washstand together, pitcher and night article on the floor separate. Bloom's axe. Bloom's axe. He deposited the articles of clothing on a chair, removing his remaining articles of clothing, took from beneath the bolster at the head of the bed a folded long white nightshirt, inserted his head and arms into the proper apertures of the nightshirt, removing a pillow from the head to the foot of the bed, prepared the bed linen accordingly, and entered the bed. How? With circumspection, as invariably when entering an abode, his own or not his own, with solicitude, the snake-spiral springs of the mattress being old, the brass quoits and pendant viper radii loose and tremulous under the stress and strain, prudently, as entering a lair or ambush of lust or adders, lightly, the least to disturb, reverently, the bed of conception and of birth, of consummation of marriage, and of breach of consummation of marriage, and breach of marriage, of sleep and of death. What did his limbs, when gradually extended, encounter? New clean bed linen, additional odors, the presence of a human form, female, hers, the imprint of a human form, male, not his, some crumbs, some flakes of potted meat, recooked, which he removed. If he had smiled, why would he have smiled? To reflect that each one who enters imagines himself to be the first to enter, whereas he is always the last of a preceding series, if the first of a succeeding one, each imagining himself to be first, last, only and alone, whereas he is neither first nor last, nor only nor alone in a series of originating in and repeatedly to infinity. What preceding series? Assuming Mulvey to be the first term of his series, Penrose, Bartel d'Arcy, the Professor Goodwin, Julius Matinansky, John Henry Menton, Father Bernard Corrigan, a farmer at the Royal Dublin Society's Horse Show, Maggot O'Reilly, Matthew Dillon, Valentine Blake Dillon, Lord Mayor of Dublin, Christopher Callanan, Lenehan, an Italian organ grinder, an unknown gentleman in the Gaiety Theatre, Benjamin Dollard, Simon Dedalus, Andrew Pisser Burke, Joseph Cuffey, Wisdom Healy, Alderman John Hooper, Dr. Francis Brady, Father Sebastian of Mount Argus, a bootblack at the General Post Office, Hugh E. Blazes Boylan, and so each, and so on to no last term. What were his reflections concerning the last members of this series and late occupant of the bed? Reflections on his vigor, a bounder, corporal proposition, a bill-sticker, commercial ability, a bester, impressionability, a boaster. Why for the observer impressionability, in addition to rigor, corporal proportion, and commercial ability? Because he had observed with augmenting frequency in the preceding members of the same series the same concupiscence, inflammably transmitted, first with alarm, then with understanding, then with desire, and finally with fatigue, with alternating symptoms of epicene comprehension and apprehension. With what antagonistic sentiments were his subsequent reflections affected? Envy, jealousy, abnegation, equanimity. Envy? Of a boldly and mental male organism specially adapted for the superincumbent posture of energetic human copulation and energetic piston and cylinder movement necessary for the complete satisfaction of a constant but not acute concupiscence resident in a bodily and mentally female organism, passive but not obtuse. Jealousy? Because a nature full and violent in its free state was alternately the agent and reagent of attraction, because attraction between agents and reagents at all instants varied with inverse proportion of increase and decrease, with incessant circular extension and radial reentrance, because the controlled contemplation of the fluctuation of attraction produced, if desired, a fluctuation of pleasure. Abnegation. In virtue of A, acquaintance initiated in September 1903 in the establishment of George Messias, merchant, tailor, and outfitter, 5 Eden Quay. B, hospitality extended and received in kind, reciprocated and reapportioned in person. C, comparative youth subject to impulses of ambition and magnanimity, collegial altruism and amorous egoism. D, extra-racial attraction, intra-racial inhibition, supraracial prerogative. E, an eminent provincial musical tour, common current expenses, net proceeds divided. Equanimity, as natural as any and every natural act of a nature expressed or understood, executed in natured nature, by natural creatures in accordance with his, her, and their natured natures of dissimilar similarity, as not so calamitous as a cataclysmic annihilation of the planet in consequence of a collision with a dark sun, as less reprehensible than theft, highway robbery, cruelty to children and animals, obtaining money under false pretenses, forgery, embezzlement, misappropriation of public money, betrayal of public trust, malingering, mayhem, corruption of minors, criminal libel, blackmail, contempt of court, arson, treason, felony, mutiny on the high seas, trespass, burglary, jailbreaking, practice of unnatural vice, desertion from armed forces in the field, perjury, poaching, usury, intelligence with the king's enemies, impersonation, criminal assault, manslaughter, willful and premeditated murder, as not more abnormal than all other parallel processes of adaptation to altered conditions of existence, resulting in a reciprocal equilibrium between the bodily organism and its attendant circumstances, foods, beverages, acquired habits, indulged inclinations, significant disease, as more than inevitable, irreparable. Why more abnegation than jealousy, less envy than equanimity? From outrage, matrimony, to outrage, adultery, there arose naught but outrage, copulation. Yet the matrimonial violator of the matrimonially violated had not been outraged by the adulterous violator of the adulterously violated. What retribution, if any? Assassination? Never, as 2 wrongs did not make 1 right. Duel by combat? No. Divorce? Not now. Exposure by mechanical artifice, automatic bed, or individual testimony, concealed ocular witness? Not yet. Suit for damages by legal influence or simulation of assault with evidence of injuries sustained, self-inflicted? Not impossibly. Hush money by moral influence? Possible. If any, positively connivance, introduction of emulation, material a prosperous rival agent of publicity, moral a successful rival agent of intimacy, deprecation, alienation, humiliation, separation protecting the one separated from the other, protecting the separator from both. By what reflections did he, a conscious reactor against the void of incertitude, justify to himself his sentiments? The preordained frangibility of the hymen, the presupposed intangibility of the thing in itself, the incongruity and disproportion between the self-prolonging tension of the thing proposed to be done and the self-abbreviating relaxation of the thing done, the fallaciously inferred debility of the female, the masculinity of the male, the variations of the ethical codes, the natural grammatical transition by inversion involving no alteration of sense of an the variations of ethical code, the natural grammatical transition by inversion involving no alteration of sense of an aorist preterite proposition, parsed as masculine subject, monosyllabic, onomatopoetic transitive verb with direct feminine object, from the active voice into its correlative aorist preterite proposition, parsed as feminine subject, auxiliary verb, and quasi-monosyllabic, onomatopoetic past participle with complementary masculine agent. In the passive voice, the continued product of seminators by generation, the continual production of semen by distillation, the futility of triumph or protest or vindication, the inanity of extolled virtue, the lethargy of nascent matter, the apathy of the stars. In what final satisfaction did these antagonistic sentiments and reflections, reduced to their simplest forms, converge? Satisfaction at the ubiquity in eastern and western terrestrial hemispheres, in all habitable lands and islands explored or unexplored, the land of the midnight sun, the islands of the blessed, the isles of Greece, the land of promise, of adipose anterior and posterior female hemispheres, redolent of milk and honey, and of excretory sanguine and seminal warmth, reminiscent of secular families of curves of amplitude, insusceptible of moods, of impression, or contrarieties of expression, expressed of mute, immutable, mature animality. The visible signs of anti-satisfaction? An approximate erection, a silicious adversion, a gradual elevation, a tentative revelation, a silent contemplation. Then he kissed the plump, mellow, yellow, smellow melons of her rump, on each plump melonious hemisphere, in their mellow yellow furrow, with obscure, prolonged, provocative, melanous osculation. The visible signs of post-satisfaction, a silent contemplation, a tentative velation, a gradual abasement, a solicitous aversion, a proximate erection. What followed this silent action? Somnolent invocation, less somnolent recognition, incipient excitation, catechetical interrogation. With what modifications did the narrator reply to this interrogation? Negative. He omitted to mention the clandestine correspondence between Martha Clifford and Henry Flower, the public altercation at, in, and in the vicinity of the licensed premise of Bernard Kiernan and Company Limited, 8, 9, and 10 Little Britain Street, the erotic provocation and response thereto caused by the exhibitionism of Gertie, surname unknown. Positive. He included mention of a performance by Mrs. Bandman Palmer of Leah at the Gaiety Theatre, 46, 47, 48, 49 South King Street, an invitation to supper at Winans, Murphy's Hotel, 35, 36, and 37 Lower Abbey Street, a volume of Peccaminous pornographical tendency entitled Sweets of Sin, a temporary concussion caused by a falsely calculated movement in the course of a post-scenal gymnastic display, the victim, since completely recovered, being Stephen Dedalus, professor and author, eldest living son of Simon Dedalus, of no fixed occupation, an aeronautical feat executed by him, narrator, in the presence of a witness, the professor and author aforesaid, with promptitude of decision and gymnastic flexibility. Was the narration otherwise unaltered by modifications? Absolutely. Which event or person emerged as the salient point of his narration? Stephen Dedalus, professor and author. What limitations of activity and inhibitions of conjugal rights were perceived by listener and narrator concerning themselves during the course of this intermittent and increasingly more laconic narration? By the listener, a limitation of fertility, inasmuch as marriage had been celebrated 1 calendar month after the 18th anniversary of her birth, 8 September 1870, viz. 8 October, and consummated on the same date with female issue born 15th June 1889, having been anticipatorily consummated on the 10th September of the same year, and complete carnal intercourse, with ejaculation of semen within the natural female organ, having last taken place 5 weeks previously, viz. 27 November 1893, to the birth on 29 December 1893 of second and only male issue, deceased 9 January 1894, aged 11 days. There remained a period of 10 years, 5 months, and 18 days, during which carnal intercourse had been incomplete, without ejaculation of semen within the natural female organ. By the narrator, a limitation of activity, mental and corporal, inasmuch as complete mental intercourse between himself and the listener had not taken place since the consummation of puberty, indicated by catametic hemorrhaging of the female issue of narrator and listener. 15 September 1903, there remained a period of 9 months and 1 day, during which, in consequence of a pre-established natural comprehension of incomprehension between the consummated female, listener, and issue, complete corporal liberty of action had been circumscribed. How? By various reiterated female interrogation concerning the masculine designation whither, the place where, the time at which, the duration for which, the object with which, in the case of temporary absences, projected or effected. What moved visibly above the listener's and the narrator's invisible thoughts? The upcast reflection of a lamp and shade, an inconsistent series of concentric circles of varying gradations of light and shadow. In what directions did listener and narrator lie? Listener southeast by east, narrator northwest by west, on the 53rd parallel of latitude north and 6th meridian of longitude west, at an angle of 45 degrees to the terrestrial equator. In what state of rest or motion? At rest, relative to themselves and to each other. In motion, being each and both carried westward, forward, and reward respectively, by the proper perpetual motion of the earth through ever-changing tracts of never-changing space. In what posture? Listener. Reclined semilaterally, left hand under head, right leg extended in a straight line and resting on left leg, flexed. In the attitude of Gaetellus, fulfilled, recumbent, big with seed. Narrator. Reclined laterally, left, with right and left legs flexed, the index finger and thumb of the right hand resting on the bridge of the nose, in the attitude depicted in a snapshot photograph made by Percy Apjohn, the child-man weary, the child-man in the womb. Womb? Weary? He rests. He has traveled. With? Sinbad the sailor and Tinbad the tailor and Jinbad the jailer and Jinbad the whaler and Ninbad the nailer and Finbad the failer and Binbad the veiler and Pinbad the paler and Pinbad the paler and the hailer and Rinbad the railer and Dinbad the caler and Vinbad the quailer and Linbad the yeller and Zinbad the failer, the yeller and Zinbad the failer. When? Going to dark bed, there was a square, round Sinbad the sailor's roc's egg in the night of the bed of all the auks of the rocks of Darkenbad the bright daler. Where?
End of chapter 17. The Ithaca section of James Joyce's Ulysses.
Recorded by Alan Davis Drake at paintedricecakes.org.
Recorded by Richard Wallis, Liberty, Missouri, 16 February 2011.
This recording is in the public domain.